So finally, I was like, okay, well, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to leave without you. I was going to go to my parents' house. And at this time, I did have my cell phone and I could talk to them. And they couldn't, when they said they were going to take it away from me, I said I was going to call the police. So I wanted to be like, okay, all right, I'm going to leave without Dallas. And I was really upset. And I remember I was going to leave the next day and I was crying and we were hugging and he gave me one of his sweaters. And then he was like, okay, I'm going to take you to the airport. And then from OSA, the gal was like, no, you can't take her to the airport. You drop her in a cab, say goodbye, and that's it. And then,
my God.
So to his credit, he was like, well, no, I'm going to take her to the airport. She's my wife. I'm not going to ever see her again. And she was like, absolutely not. And started acting crazy. She was like, fine, I'm going to be in the car with you guys. So she was in the back seat. He was dropping me off and saying goodbye. And at that time, I remembered something, as I was leaving in the airport, about to get on my flight, I remembered something that someone had said to me, a very senior executive. He was the third in command of Scientology. He was like, all we care about is how you're doing. Dallas can be thrown to the sharks. If I leave, they're basically they're going to destroy him.
Hey guys, if you're not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button as well as that like button on the video. They are both a huge, huge help. If you're not following me on Instagram or on X, my links are in the description below, so please go follow me over there. Thank you. Jenna, thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
It was an awesome surprise when Aaron mentioned that you were going to be coming in town too, but obviously in the past, you've had a best-selling book where you went through your journey and you did some interviews. Looks like a lot of them were 10, 11 years ago. Is that about right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there's good content of you on YouTube, but you really, we heard from Aaron yesterday on the podcast. He grew up in the inner sanctum of Scientology. You did as well, but on another level of that, you were a part of Scientology's royal family, if you will.
Right.
And yet you also had the bravery to end up breaking away from that and leaving that now many years ago, and also from the outside speaking up. So I think that's incredible, but I'd really like to go through your story today and understand Scientology through your eyes as you understand it, if that's cool.
Of course.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Where you weren't living in California when you were born, you were telling me?
Right. Yeah, I was born in New Hampshire. My parents had previously been in Scientology and the Sea Organization, and then they had left. And then just before I turned 2, they went back to California and joined up again.
So they were allowed to come back to the Sea Org even though they had left it?
There was some sort of thing going on where they were told that, you got in trouble before, but this person is gone who you had gotten in trouble with. It wasn't your fault, and we'll sort of forgive everything, and you'll be in good standing again.
Okay, so that's a new one for me. So when they went into the Sea Org, though, we were talking about some of this on the podcast with Aaron, but there's all kinds of rules there.
Right.
And one of them is that you, at the time being 2 years old, you were essentially, if I understand it, mostly separated from your parents, right?
Yeah, so when they joined in Los Angeles, at first I was living with them, but then when I was 4, they went to the Scientology International Management Base, where I only saw them once a week from that point on.
So you're 4 years old, only seeing your parents once a week.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think, my first memories that I can even think of on this earth are when I'm 3, mostly 4 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So do you really remember a lot about your parents from when you were a younger kid? Or is it mostly they were here once in a while and I saw them?
I mean, I definitely remember because I would look forward to the day that I would see them the entire week. And so it was a big event for me. And that was really special. And it was just for a few hours.
So it's not even a day or what, it's almost like visitation hours.
Yeah. I mean, it was almost like they would be sleeping in the morning, and then we would get up and eat some food, and then they would leave because they were coming down from San Bernardino. So they were 2 hours away. So they would have to drive down and then drive back up.
And who were you living with again?
So I actually lived in the apartment where my parents would come down and see me, but there was a gal that they had stay with me she was just another staff member, but they had her stay with me when they weren't there.
So that's so strange. So they would literally hire someone from Scientology to watch you, but your own parents, who are also in Scientology, aren't allowed to be with you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And they wouldn't hire her. She was just a staff member, just an extra duty that she did.
Yeah. Told what to do. Either way.
Right. Yeah.
That's wild to me. So how many years did it go on like that?
So that was for about 2 years. And then I went up to somewhere that was closer to where they were. It was about 20 minutes away, but I still only saw them once a week. It was like a boarding school.
Well, I mean, so you're going to school then up there, but it's not Scientology related. It's a different kind of school.
It's only a Scientology Sea Org. Yeah, so it's like the place where we were. It was like owned by Scientology and the Sea Org and the International Management Base, and it was all kids of people who worked at the International Management Base.
Is that the ranch?
Yeah.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Okay, I think Tony talked about that.
Yeah.
So how many? Are you around? This is not like that many kids, I would imagine. Like how many kids are at this at one given time?
Well, there was about 80 kids there.
Yeah, so it's not like 800 or something like that. So there's not. Right. They're all different ages too.
Right. Yeah. So like my brothers were there, but they are 8 years older than me.
So is the schooling like? Do they have you in grades or based on your age and your learning level, or how did that work?
So there were no grades, and we spent half the day like doing work to upgrade the property and to like make it nicer and even like do construction and like build gardens. And then the second half of the day was schooling, but there weren't any grades. We were all together in one classroom, kids of all ages, and we basically learned things on like a checklist that were called check sheets it was like self-led learning. So nobody was teaching us anything. We had to follow the checklist and do what it said. And if we asked questions, like basically they weren't even allowed to answer questions that we had, because in L. Ron Hubbard's study technology, he basically says if you can't understand what you're reading, it's because there's a word you don't understand. And so literally if we would ask the teacher for help, they'd be like, okay, what word don't you understand? We were never allowed to have anything explained to us.
Thinking back on that, because when I picture things like this in a movie, it feels like a 1984 type movie, right? Where the teacher in that case is like a robot.
Right.
And you walk up to them and they're like, what word don't you understand?
Right.
Like, I would imagine it doesn't quite look like that, but I'm getting nods over here from Aaron.
It's exactly like that.
It's like that.
Yeah.
Guys, if you're not following me on Instagram, you can get me at Julian Dorey Podcast or also on my personal page at Julian D. Dorey. Those links are in the description below. You can also follow me on X at Julian D. Dorey. That link is in the description below. And as always, please smash that subscribe button if you haven't already and hit that like button on the video. It is a huge, huge help. I appreciate all of you who have been subbing and all of you who are liking all these videos. Thank you. And you're just a kid, so this is all you know. You think that that's how everyone is. Right.
Yeah. So you're looking back at it like 1984, and I'm looking back at it like normal.
Whoa. When did you realize who your uncle was? Who your family was?
From when I was very little, even like when I was 4, my dad and my uncle would be speaking at Scientology events, and I would like be like, "It's me, hi," like wave to them from the audience, but I didn't really realize that meant that they were more important or whatever. But I remember once when I was at the ranch, I was probably like maybe 7 or 8, and another kid told me, he was like, your uncle is COB, and that's chairman of the board.
Yeah.
And I was like, what's that? And he was like, it's like very important. He's the boss. And I was like, really? And he was like, yes.
Am I rich?
He's like, no. It just means you'll be tortured more than everyone for the rest of your life. No, he didn't say that.
Oh, my God. I was like, Jesus Christ. That got morbid fast. How close, like, how high was your dad, like, in ranking? Was he, like, his number 2 or 3 or something like that?
No, but in terms of all of Scientology, he was in international management and had a very important post.
So high up.
Yes, yeah, but not in the same organization as my uncle.
Did you really have any interactions with your uncle when you were young?
Yeah, it definitely did. Yeah. But they weren't in a work capacity. They were like in an uncle capacity. So I didn't work with him or anything like that. Like if I was on the international base, like sometimes we would go there to do study, or sometimes we would go there to help help make the food or help on other projects. Like for a while we helped make the e-meters that you guys were talking about the other day. We were like part of their production line.
This is like the prisons making the fucking car tags and stuff,
Yeah.
but they got you making e-meters.
Yeah, except making e-meters was at least done in like a nice air-conditioned environment.
That's good.
Where
That's
the work
good.
that we did at the ranch was like digging trenches.
Yeah.
So the e-meter thing was like fun in comparison.
If we're gonna have slaves, we need AC.
Exactly.
All right? That's our middle ground right here.
It's like Santa's elves. All the children lined up making the toys.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but like when I would be walking around there, he would like just sometimes like pick me up on his motorcycle and like take me to his office. And I would like pet his dogs, and then mostly I would chat with Shelly, and they would like take silly photos of me like at his desk on the phone as if I was like running the world or something. And so he was nice to me when I was a kid.
Did he ever like have, after you had that conversation with that kid who told you who he was, did he ever have any conversations with you where you asked him about that, or he talked about the business Scientology when you were younger?
I didn't have any conversations with him about that specifically, no. But I remember like one time when he was coming out to the ranch, and it was like to do an inspection, and we were all supposed to prepare. We did this type of cleaning that was called white glove, where we had to clean everything and dust everything so well that someone, you know, if they were wearing a white glove, they would touch it and it wouldn't have any marks on it. So we were like doing that in preparation for him to come out and visit. And like there was this rumor that he could like walk into a room and put his hand on the wall and just feel it, and he would know if the room was dirty. I don't know, whatever. It was just like some kid's lore thing.
Oh my God.
But so when he was coming out, they were like, okay, Jenna, when he comes, when he arrives, you have to walk up to him and be like, hi, sir, would you like some lemonade? And be carrying the lemonade or whatever. And then, so I remember I did that, and he was like, no, thank you. And he was like, and you don't have to call me sir. I'm your uncle. So I think that like when I was at that young age, you know, he was uncomfortable with me having to call him sir. Right. But later I definitely did.
Oh, so that changed eventually.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And so some of the times when I was in his office or talking to Shelly, he would just like ask me little questions about like other people in management, but I was never part of any of his decisions or anything like that. He would just like gossip or chat about it or whatever. But I would see him interacting with other executives, and I could see that they were afraid of him. And when I was young...
How'd you know that? Like just seeing fear on their face or other things?
Yeah, like I could see how he would talk to them, and I could see them being like, you know, he kind of had like a dominating personality. And sometimes I would be taken out of the room, and I knew it was so that he could yell at them. They called it a severe reality adjustment, SRA. But it was like, oh, you're a kid, go out of the room. But I was like, well, we yell at each other all the time at the ranch. Everyone yells at us. So it was like, it was almost like they thought I was a child, and I was. But I was like, oh, God, I already know about all this, you guys.
So it wasn't, but again, like that's your only reality. So it's not like it's percolating yet. They're like, oh, this is not how things are supposed to be done. You're just thinking this is the order of business of the world. Like people like this are in charge of things. Other people are afraid of them. Happens to be my family, and this is the organization I'm a part of, and that's just what it is. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. I think, you know, when you're a kid, you start with taking in everything, and then as you get older, you start kind of judging it and seeing the contradictions. But at this point, I was just like, you know, taking information in.
Did you ever like, because you were talking about how David would come over and pick you up sometimes, take you over to his place with Shelly, but did you ever see like extended interactions between your parents and your aunt and uncle as well? Like were they ever really together in front of you?
Yeah, like so like at certain events, like celebrations or whatever, we would sit at the same table with them, or during Christmas, like, you know, the staff would get a day off, and we were usually like in a house with them. up in the mountains, like in Big Bear. That's like the closest like snowy area to where we were at in California. And so, yeah. And my parents would act afraid of them, like would sort of like be on eggshells or of him. And it was obvious because sometimes I would say things to him and later they'd be like, don't say that.
Oh.
And
It's
so
a reflection on us.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they would do things like be like, go say thank you to your Uncle Dave for this gift and write a nice letter. Let's write it together. So I could kind of see that they were like a little bit like on eggshells and they kind of cared a lot about what he thought. And I knew he was important. I mean, at certain celebrations they would have at the base. I mean, like people were bringing him food. Everyone was afraid of him.
All right, summer's over. I know you missed the beach bars, but you're getting back into the routine. And what you don't want to do is let your fitness goals fall by the wayside. And the number one way that happens is if you don't focus on what you're putting in your mouth. But fear not, because that's why Factor's here with their no prep, no mess meals. Factor has a menu full of chef-crafted meals like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great-tasting meals. Make today the day you kickstart a new healthy routine. What are you waiting for? With 35 different meals and over 60 add-ons to choose from every week, you'll always have new flavors to explore. From breakfast to dessert, Factor is your fuel for easy and nutritious options. You can treat yourself to restaurant-quality meals that feature ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, and blackened salmon. And like I said, the best part is Factor meals are ready in just 2 minutes, which means no shopping, prepping, cooking, or cleaning up. Furthermore, you can customize your nutrition goals by choosing from 6 different menu preferences the Factor has, such as managing calories, maximizing protein intake, avoiding meat, or simply eating well balanced. So head on over to factormeals.com/Julian50 and use code Julian50 at checkout to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code Julian50 at factormeals.com/Julian50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. Almost sounds like Michael Corleone a little bit. Sorry, I'll turn you on there. You got a mic right there.
Oh, okay. Well, and Jenna's dad is Dave's older brother. So I think it is more interesting to imagine an older brother acting afraid of a younger brother because just of the power he wields within the organization. Oof. And his ability to determine your fate.
Right. Yeah.
Scary. Now, what about your grandparents too? Because like your grandfather, who just passed away a few years ago, unfortunately, he ended up becoming a huge vocal critic of his own son, which is really like, that whole thing's like almost biblical. Like listening to that and how hard, I couldn't fathom that. But when you were growing up, he was in the organization still. So is he at these celebrations at Christmas and stuff as well, or?
Yeah, he is too. I mean, he was also like, he was just like kind of a loud, like wild and crazy person. That's how I thought of him. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't super close with him. His wife, Becky, I guess I spent more time talking with her. He was just so loud and like, that I would be embarrassed to be around him. But I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean like, I don't know. I was shy. So yeah, but he was definitely around and like being loud and crazy. So him and my grandma weren't together. She wasn't in the Sea Org. So later on when I moved to Florida, as part of, Scientology stuff, she was there and me and her were more close.
So when you were growing up, like, you knew he was your grandfather, though, right?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
You were very aware of who he was.
Yeah, and when he would see me, he would hug me. He would send me like $5 at Christmas or my birthday or something like that.
Scientology uses real money. Who knew? So it's just like, I try to imagine it, but when we say family or something like that, the way that I know what a family is, just from being born, and the way that you know what a family is are two very different things, right? Like you don't, as you've already laid out here, you don't have real, true, prolonged interaction with these people, but you know who they are. So I actually don't want to answer this question for you, but like when you were a child, you said you really look forward to your parents coming back and stuff. You at least knew who your grandfather was. You knew who your uncle was. Would you describe yourself as like feeling love for them?
I definitely did for my mom and my dad, because when I was really little, I think that that's like programmed in, you know, like I really needed them and I just always wanted to be with them. And I think that like the fact that I wasn't made that even stronger. But I guess, so with my parents I did, but how you describe family otherwise, like it kind of isn't a thing for me. Like I knew Dave was my uncle, I knew Shelly was my aunt, I knew my grandpa was my grandpa, but it was like this weird thing because we were also working every day at the ranch and we were told that we were adults in small bodies.
You were told you were adults in small bodies.
Well, we knew that, so in Scientology they believe that you are a thetan, which is a spiritual being. You're not your body, and you're a spiritual being who has lived for, you know, billions of years. And, you know, just because you're this body that you happen to have at this time is young, you are actually not. And so, you know, we did not think of ourselves as kids. Mm-hmm. And so, and also, you know, your family isn't really your family.
Yeah.
They're just another thetan. So it was kind of confusing. Like it was like on one hand, people saw me as part of this family, but I don't know, it's not like I hung out with them all the time. The people who I hung out with all the time were other kids at the ranch. But people sort of saw me in this way, but then at the same time they're saying that family is nothing. It was just confusing.
Of course. That's just unfathomable. But like you obviously felt that, as you just said, with your parents. Did you feel it in return from them? Do you think that, not after we'll get to them ended up getting out of Scientology and everything, but while they're in and you're a kid, did you feel like they loved you, or was there a little bit of a almost like barrier between you when you were with them?
So with my dad, I did feel that way because my mom was regularly away. Like her job was to build do renovations on certain Scientology churches. So she was away at the Ship, which was in Curacao. She like did all the renovations on that. After that, she did the Celebrity Center in LA. And after that, she was in Florida. So I didn't see her for 6 months at a time. And even then, it was just once a week, where my dad, I at least saw him once a week. He would like make breakfast. He would like write me during the week. I could tell that he wanted to be with me. He wanted to spend time with me, and that he was sad that he couldn't spend more time with me. And so I guess I felt, you know, like I wanted to see my parents and I wanted to see them more. And I considered once I graduated from the ranch, I would be able to see them every day. But at some point probably about when I was 12, I was just like, I don't know, I guess kind of like that urge that you have when you're a little kid, like that sort of didn't control my feelings and needs anymore. And it just, my friends were sort of my family. Those are the people who I lived with. Those are the people who I talked to every day. Those are the people who I went to if I needed help with anything. They're basically like your brother and sisters.
Yeah.
Like I didn't live in a house with my parents or anything like that. So I think that probably all changed when I was about 12.
The friends you're talking about specifically, though, are they like right in your age group? As you said, everyone on the ranch was all different ages.
Right, yeah. So it would have been certain ones that were like right in my age group. Or
imagine that, like being 12 years old, for people out there listening, and the people you can go to for advice are like the people your age.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Right.
I'm glad you had them, but still, you know, there's a void there for sure.
Right.
And what about your siblings? You said they were 8 years older than you?
Yeah, so they were 8 years older than me. And then by the time, you know, they had graduated to work at the base, so they weren't there.
How old are you when you do that, when you graduate, approximately?
So I actually didn't graduate. I wound up moving to Florida, away from my brothers and my parents, and was just there by myself.
How old were you when you did that?
I was 12.
And what precipitated that? Like you doing that?
So I had been there once or twice to visit my mom before. And basically we were all told that at the ranch we had to become auditors, which is kind of like a Scientology counselor. And that's a lot of training that goes into that, like years. And so they sent me to Florida to do that training because that's supposed to be the best training in the world.
So similar to what Aaron got sent down there to do effectively, but then the narrative there changed. You ended up doing something else. Got it. Yeah, we actually met when on an earlier visit when I was probably like 9 and he was like maybe 13, or I was 10 and he was 13. So we were on the same course together at one point. So you guys have known each other for a very long time then. Yeah. Yeah. And you were
when I got married in the Sea Org, she and her husband in the Sea Org were at our wedding.
Yeah.
It's a small world. Very small world. We'll get to that. But so you go to Florida when you're 12, and how long were you there for?
I was there until I was about 16 and a half.
So that's like 4.5 years to learn to be an auditor.
Yes.
And then did you become an auditor?
So just in the time that I was there, my job changed, my training, what they wanted me to train for changed. So I was trained to use the e-meter, but I had a couple different jobs, but I was not yet trained to be an auditor.
Okay. And for people who didn't hear Aaron's podcast, that's going to come out right before this one, just real quickly, what is the e-meter so that they understand that?
So the e-meter is kind of like a lie detector looking device where there's like the auditor and then the person that they're auditing, and the person they're auditing holds cans and it sends like a tiny electrical current through their body, and you just like are supposed to interpret reactions from their mind through the e-meter.
Real quick, just to go back for a second, because I want to make sure I understand context. Mm-hmm. When you're at the ranch until age 12, you said you left before graduating. First question, your brothers who graduated, how old were they when they were able to leave after actually graduating?
I think that they were probably like 16 or something like that. But so when I went to Florida, it was actually essentially treated like a graduation. Like I was now in the Sea Org.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So when you're going through with the teacher up front and everything, and they're having you read stuff, they're having you read a lot of Scientology stuff as well. But did you feel like any more basic core American school skills like math and, English and stuff like that were, you were getting taught any of that? Or was it more just really Scientology based?
At the ranch?
Yeah.
So they basically just taught. So in the afternoon we did regular studies, like regular schooling, and then in the evening until like 9:30 at night we did Scientology studies. But with like the regular educational studies, they were not teaching us anything. There were no grades. We were teaching ourselves, and basically it was just focused on literacy, like writing well, vocabulary, reading, and like basic math. But there wasn't like social studies or science or anything like that. They would let us do a few research projects, but it didn't even tell us what to read. It was like, go find what you're interested in the encyclopedia and write an essay about it. So yeah, it just wasn't considered something that we would need in order to be Sea Org members, and it was always assumed that we would be Sea Org members. It was predetermined. Like, I even signed my billion-year contract when I was 7 years old.
When you were 7, you signed the billion-year contract.
Yeah. So we were cadets, and we were going to be Sea Org members. That was always the plan.
See, why is something like that seems blatantly illegal to me. Like I could take that into any court and say, I know you guys are considering this a religion, but like this is taking advantage of a child. Why don't we see cases like that get made in U.S. court?
I mean, in this exact case, like a billion-year contract would probably just be seen as a pretend silly thing because it's ridiculous. So it's not like really something they could hold us to, but I didn't know that, I was just like, and I was like, of course, my parents work there. Of course, I mean, I want to do this for a billion years.
At 7.
Yes. Yeah.
I was coloring at 7. I mean, that was like, you know, that was the upward mobility of my capabilities at that time. And you're signing billion-year contracts.
Yeah.
That then you're starting to follow through at age 12, effectively.
Right. I mean, we were even doing it there. I mean, even at the ranch, we were all organized into different groups and different units. We had gatherings several times a day. We would stand in lines. We would like do a report, like Unit 1 report. And it was like all present and accounted for. And we had jobs like that we would do even before we did the labor. Like I was like, for a little bit, I was like the medical officer.
The medical officer.
Yeah, but I didn't like do stitches or anything like that. But I was responsible for like handing out vitamins, and I was supposed to ask everyone every day if they had any illness. If they had like a rash, I would give them the cream for it. And if people were sick, I was supposed to bring them food because they would be put in isolation. So I would bring food to that room during meal times. I would take their temperatures and write it down and everything like that. So that was before we even did all the upgrades during the day, which we did for 35 hours a week. And then we did schooling in the afternoon, and then in the evening we did Scientology studies.
Did you have any downtime whatsoever for yourself?
No, we had like a 15-minute break during school time. Yeah, but it was like run to the canteen and pay for your snacks out of your $5 that you made that week. And and then go back to course.
Can't say Scientology doesn't teach discipline. I'll give them that. There's definitely a lot of discipline there, but illegal discipline. So the other thing I was forgetting in there was your brothers. They were 8 years older, and they had graduated by the time you were 11, 12 up in there. But when you were younger, did you have a lot of interaction with them and a good relationship? What was that like?
So my brothers are twins, and they are but they're not, like, my mom is they're my half brothers. So my mom is their mom, and their dad is another guy who was in the Sea Org. And so when they were young, like before I was born, it was somehow decided that my mom would take one of my brothers and the dad would take the other brother. And so I only grew up with one of them as being like my brother. So they were like separated when they were little. But then they came back together later on when my parents rejoined the Sea Org. So one of them was like my brother, and we had like, he was my older brother. Like he would kind of tease me, because he was at the ranch, I think I kind of looked at him as a parental figure. I mean, he may not have been aware of this though, but he was also 8 years older than me. So he was like, I
mean, you're looking for anything to fill that role at that point, and that's significantly older compared to everything else you're dealing with.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and like sometimes when I was like crying or something like that, he would like make me feel better. And then, sometimes on other days he would torture me. So just the usual.
What the brothers do. But what about like, how does Scientology, like what kinds of things would make you cry? I mean, you're a kid, things make you cry, but I'm thinking of this differently because you're in a cult that's like controlling everything you do.
Right, totally, yeah. Yeah, and that's a good question because for the most part, like when I was a kid, I knew, and honestly, I still am trying to get over knowing this. Actually, I'm doing pretty good at it. But like I was like, don't cry because it does nothing. Like you're still going to have to do what you're supposed to do anyways. It doesn't work. You just get in trouble. But there were a few times when I was just like, well, I can't stop myself from crying or getting upset. But it was, I don't know, it would just be something like I would get in trouble for, like stupid things, like asking my friend to help me on my math. Like, and you're not allowed to talk in the course room. But like, and I needed help on something. I needed her to explain something to me. But that's like considered terrible to have someone explain something to you. You have to find the word you don't understand. And we would get screamed at. Like,
the teacher would scream at you. Yeah,
across the whole classroom. That's not an exaggeration. That's how we were talked to all the time. Like, it wasn't like, you guys, please stop talking. It was like, Jenna, shut the fuck up. And like, we would get sent to like the ethics office, and like we would even get demoted for something as simple as talking in the classroom. So, you know, so just like something like that, or like if you were late for a muster, that's what the gathering meetings were called. You'd get brought up in front of the group and like just like kind of embarrassed. For a period of time, if you were late, they would dump like a bucket of ice water over your head. Like it was like a takeaway from when the Sea Org was on a boat and they would throw people overboard. And so that was us being thrown overboard, was like being dumped with a bucket of ice water.
Or they throw people overboard.
Yeah, right.
That's nice. I'm just trying to picture that teacher we were talking about, like, and then suddenly being like, what the fuck? Like it's just like, you know, your kids, when we're reading facial expressions, especially women more than guys, more than ever when we are young kids and developing, because we're trying to understand what our surroundings are, and this becomes the baseline of how you think human behavior is. I mean, you're literally seeing like controlled robotic bipolarism in front of you at all times. That's wild.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good way of putting it. That's exactly what it is. And I think like you just like learn to like be a chameleon because you're always trying to predict someone's behavior. And so you're just like, okay, who do I need to be in this exact second in order to survive? And as a result, you don't learn to be yourself. You know nothing about yourself. You don't have time to like do art. You don't have time to be like, what am I interested in? Because who cares? You're just going to be a Sea Org member. Who cares what you're interested in? In fact, you're probably better off never figuring it out so that you don't have to miss it. You know, and you're also kind of like never really alone. You live in a dorm with like 8 other people connected by a bathroom with 8 other kids. And
are there decorations on the wall, or is it just like a blank, like almost like a prison cell kind of setup?
So it's not a prison cell, but it like there's not decorations. We all had uniform like beds and dressers, and there is a picture of L. Ron Hubbard in every room and like a quote from him. It's
like Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, so
we used to have his picture in every room.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like in Nazi Germany, like you'd have to. It was highly looked down upon. Maybe we can look this up to make sure I'm not fucking this up, Alessi. But it was highly looked down upon to not have the leader, the Führer, on your wall in some form of picture, like Jesus, if you will. So that's the same thing.
Yeah. Totally, yeah. So we weren't allowed to have our own things out, and our dorms would be inspected every single day for cleanliness. And like there was like a system, like where if your birthing flunked inspection once, you would like kind of get a warning, and the third time it flunked, you would get sent to Pig's Birthing.
To what?
It was called Pig's Birthing. So it's like basically like a like my friend was once sent to live in this like unrenovated sort of dilapidated house on the second floor, and there are like bats in there and stuff. So I mean, most people were like our room would get up early so that we never had to be sent to Pig's Birthing. Like I was never sent there, but it's a policy written by L. Ron Hubbard, the birthing chits, and it's if you fail this many times, these are the punishments.
Oof. To kids too.
Yeah, everything that we did was like so regimented and strict. We each had our own job. We had our own statistic. We had to mark our statistic on the graph every day.
Your own statistic?
Yeah. So so my statistic as the medical officer was how many kids were well. So ironically, it's something I'm not even really in control of. Like I could try to like give people as many vitamins as possible.
You're feeling good today. You understand me? God damn it.
Well, that's how it became. That's how it kind of was. Like, because if you wanted to get the reward at the end of the week, which was sometimes just like watching a movie and having popcorn, then you'd be like, do you have any sickness today? And they'd be like, oh, well, this. And I'd be like, but are you sure? Like, are you feeling like you have to have your statistic be up. Otherwise you can't get that reward. But like other times when I had another job, which was just like a groundskeeper, it's like the number of square feet that pass inspection as far as cleanliness and upgrades. And it has to increase each week for your statistic to be up. Mm-hmm. And we had to calculate that every day after we woke up. We had like 3 different cleaning stations a day. We had assigned duties if there was ever an intruder, a fire, or anything like that. we just had so many things that we had to do all day, all the time.
How many hours a night did you sleep?
Well, we went to, so lights out was at 9:30 and we woke up at 6:30 a.m.
So they have you sleeping at least.
Yeah.
That's nice of them.
Yeah.
But what was the, like, you started maybe to kind of answer a question I was going to have, because it kind of surprised me when you said there might be a movie and popcorn at the end of the week, because I was going to ask you, you'd mentioned a few minutes ago, like, oh, we couldn't do art and stuff. Like, did you know what art was? Did you have a concept of music? I would imagine maybe you did if they're showing you movies. Like, what kind of movies would they have in there even?
I mean, I think it was just like any movie for the most part. Music, we did listen to the radio. A lot of times when we were working, we listened to music. So there was actually quite a lot of music, but like sometimes like certain radio stations we weren't allowed to listen to because they once spoke about L. Ron Hubbard or something like that. So
was that Howard Stern?
No. What's the one in LA called? Oh, K-Rock.
Oh, yeah. That's like a big station.
Yeah, that was banned for a while. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
But did you have favorite music artists or whatever, or it was just like cool background noise?
I definitely had favorite music artists I would get made fun of because it was like Mariah Carey and like Boyz II Men. It wasn't cool.
Why are people making fun of that? They're fire. Come on.
Because I guess some of them would like listen to punk music. But I remember like the Sex Pistols were banned because L. Ron Hubbard like wrote a policy about them once and how they were a bad influence. So they weren't allowed to listen to them, which was just fine because they kind of suck.
So like if their song went to come on, would like one of the teachers, like if it's coming on the radio, one of the teachers run to the radio and like change the station?
Well, more like if you had a CD of theirs, it would get taken away.
Oh, so you had your own personal CDs and like Walkmans and stuff.
Yeah, we did have. I had that. Not everyone did, but like
But
so
you were allowed to.
Right. So like one of my things me and my dad would do on Sunday mornings, because I was only allowed to see him on Sunday morning, is we would go to the CD shop and I would use like some of my pay and he would use some of his pay and we would get CDs because we both liked music.
This is like when you're like 10 years old, that kind of thing?
Yeah,
8,
like
9,
between
10.
when I was 6 and 12.
So you're using some of your money to buy CDs. Dad's not buying you CDs there.
He's using some of his money too, because I would have had to save up for like 4 weeks, which I used all my money on like buying snacks in the canteen. So I guess buying my snacks, yeah.
Yeah, what was the food like in there? Could you eat when you wanted, or like was that very regimented too?
So we absolutely could not eat when we wanted. We had to eat during meals, and if you stole food from the refrigerator, which people did sometimes, you would be assigned a lower condition, which is just basically there's certain, like you would basically be required to make amends, and then you would sort of be like, you would have to make amends during like your own time, which was basically only your meal time. Like you would literally have to be like, I cleaned this whole room up, even though it's like do something that's outside of your regular job. And then you would have to like get everyone in the group to sign a piece of paper that said you were allowed to be out of your lower condition or you'd made enough amends in order to be out of that lower condition or to stop having to make amends.
That's a form of conditioning right there. I mean, making you do that. Holy shit.
Yeah.
And we got off it, but like what kind of movies would be back there when you go to see some? Would it be like a regular full Hollywood movie or?
Yeah, it was just like mostly regular movies. I'm trying to remember. I mean, so when we would go home on Saturday evening and then we would see our parents on Sunday morning. And by the way, by home I mean when we would go to our parents' apartments. Yeah. Like we would watch I remember my brothers would watch Top Gun, or one of my brothers was super into Steven Seagal. Yeah. Yeah. Or we would watch Ace Ventura a lot.
Okay.
And I would want to watch The Little Mermaid. And they like still make fun of me because they're traumatized from watching The Little Mermaid too much.
A little girl wants to watch The Little Mermaid. What a shocker.
Yeah.
Come on. That's nuts.
Yeah, so just that kind of thing.
So that's the thing. Like there's little bits of normalcy. here and there. Like they sprinkle in just enough almost to like fill the minimal amount of dopamine you need to keep going. And then the rest of your life, they make this hell and try to tell you it's not.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So we were sort of told that because we were given a place to sleep and we were being given food, that if we didn't do our jobs and give back, if we didn't give exchange for what we were being given, then L. Ron Hubbard believed you would become a criminal.
Yeah.
So basically we thought that if we didn't do that, then we would become criminals.
Did you learn anything about... I feel like I know the answer to this question, but I still got to ask it. Did you learn anything about, like, American society or, like, America as a country? And because you said you didn't have social studies or anything like that, but did you learn about how anything slightly real worked?
We had, like, one course that was, like, very basic on it, but for me it was, like, learning about, like, the Hunger Games or something. It was like, who cares? Like, blah, 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 whatever. That has nothing to do with me. So it's not something I use, so it's not something I would retain. So
did you think of yourself as an American, or did you think of yourself as a person that's just put on this earth who's in this thing called Scientology?
The second one, definitely. Yeah. I mean, and especially because they were, like, in a lot of the places where I was in Scientology, there were Scientologists from all around the world who spoke different languages from different countries. And so, yeah. Being an American was not particularly a thing for me. It just seemed like a worldwide thing.
Again, something I can't relate because, like, when we're growing up, by the time you're 4 or 5, you're like, "Yay, we live in America. Look at the flag." Like, you know, you're at least, you know, you're a part of. You don't really get it yet. Like, there's all these other countries and whatever, but you know, like, ooh, I live in a place that this is what it's called, and so it becomes a part of your identity.
Right.
And you never get that. You just have an identity of a cult that your family happens to run, which is wild. So, I'm sorry, were you going to say something? Yeah.
Well, I was never in contact with people who were outside of Scientology. And so, like, ever. I was on the ranch, or I was at my parents' apartment, or I was on the base. And so we were sort of taught if you went to a regular school that they would, like, drug you. They had psychiatrists. And we were told, like, if we ever were in contact with people who weren't Scientologists, who we called that we had to, like, tell them a story. Like, we had to be like, oh, I'm a student, and I never understood why. So I was always afraid. I never understood why we had to tell them something other than what was true. And so I was just, like, kind of afraid to interact with people who weren't Scientologists. And so it kind of creates this bubble where everyone you know is in Scientology or a Critic member. And, like, that was just kind of my whole world. I was kind of afraid of anybody who wasn't.
Do you remember, like, what car your parents drove?
So Critic members, they drive around, like, they're in buses. So from their birthing building or where they live, they go in buses from there to where they work or to the base.
So they don't have a car or any kind of autonomy like that. So you're not seeing that kind of thing.
Well, you only make $50 a week. So how would you pay for insurance or a car payment or a car? My dad actually did happen to have a car, but I think it was, like, gifted to him by his sister or something like that. But, like, even later on, like, you know, when I was married, my husband had a car that his mom had given to him. But even just, like, how do you pay for parking as a Critic member? So it's, like, just not really feasible.
But, like, did you wonder, like, when you saw cars and stuff like that? Because you said you went to a CD store, you went places. Like, it's not like you never saw real society, right? Like, you at least could see it. You're not really in it, but you could see it. Like, did you wonder, like, damn, I wonder where that comes from, or how these people can afford that, or whatever?
When we went places, my dad talked to people because I was honestly kind of afraid. Like, I didn't know what to say. And sometimes they would try to talk to me and they'd be like, "Hi, honey, are you in school?" And I was like, they're like, "What grade are you in?" And I was like, shit. Like, what am I supposed to tell them and why? Oh. Like, so that's, like, I even remember when I flew to Florida, like, I flew by myself and I was sitting next to this lady who was trying to be really nice to me, but she was, like, asking me all these questions. And it was so nerve-wracking. Like, she was like, "Are you going to Tampa?" And I didn't even really, I was like, "No, I'm going to Flag."
Flag.
Yeah, because the base in Clearwater is
right.
called.
Yeah.
So I didn't even really know where I was going.
And she's like, "What's that?" And you have no concept to even explain it.
Yeah, and I was like, "What's Tampa?" Even though I was going there, I just didn't know anything, and so it was just scary to be around people who weren't Scientologists.
But you're flying alone on a plane. Who took you to the airport to do that? Your parents?
I think so they have like an airport run, because they like send the intercommunications like letters or whatever through like on a plane every day. They have a mail pack from the different Scientology bases, so they have a run to the airport.
Oh, they don't use the U.S. Postal Service. They use their own.
Don't. Yeah, they do.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So they just like have a gopher, like a cartel coyote, if you will.
Yeah.
With a mail bag, wearing a mailman uniform on a plane from Florida to L.A.
Well, I think they just like put a box on the plane. They just deliver it, and at every Scientology base they have that. Yeah.
So then they can read the mail ahead of time too and spy on people, I would imagine.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Like when I was in Florida, they had us sign a paper that was giving permission to have our mail checked. And for a small period of time, I worked in the department that actually opened mail.
What was that like?
So I was just in the office when they were doing it. I didn't read the mail, but it would be like, so they were looking for people outside of Scientology who were externally influencing you, who were like, I don't know, like sending you stuff or trying to make it look like, or saying bad things about Scientology, or were sending you things from the outside world that would make you possibly want to leave or something like that.
So you're sitting in the office, but would you like see the guys who were opening this up physically?
Oh yeah, and
there?
they would read it out. Like they'd be like,
oh my
God,
loud.
her aunt said this. Yeah.
And what would happen to someone if, like, I would imagine you were there in a situation where maybe a Scientologist said something very wrong. Like what was the chain of command like at that point? And what kind of punishments did you even hear about punishments that might happen?
Yeah, so like if just for example, there's this one gal when I was in Florida, and her relative from Germany like wrote something bad about Scientology in the letter. So basically she would get pulled in to the department that I was working in, and she would basically be asked she would either have to handle this individual and make them like good with Scientology without, getting too far into the weeds with it, because she's not allowed to really debate Scientology with them. She'd have to handle them to stop saying anything, or she would have to disconnect from them. Those are the two options. And so they either stopped doing that, or they would not be allowed to write her anymore. She would have to tell them, I no longer want to be in contact with you.
Do you remember the first time you learned about what disconnection was?
I don't know if I remember. I mean, so there were a few kids at the ranch who weren't, like, their father or something like that wasn't, like they had been declared a suppressive person.
A suppressive person.
Yeah. So that's somebody who basically like speaks publicly about Scientology in a negative way. So like I knew like we never saw their dad, and I knew that their dad had been declared a suppressive person. So I guess that would be the first time I heard about disconnection.
Is there any understanding of like how serious that? Because I mean, it's such a cold word too for something that's so. I mean, it's horrible in every way. Like, did you have any feeling of that, or you just kind of knew what it was? Like, oh, okay, you can't. Someone decides to leave and speak publicly, you just can't be around them anymore. But you didn't like imagine what it would be like if you were in those shoes or something.
I guess, it was just like considered part of life. I mean, we already saw our parents so infrequently. So like from when I was 12 until I was 16, I maybe saw each of my parents once for a few hours. They were 3,000 miles away. So while I could still write to them, it's just like the disconnection was seen as something that was just part of the deal. Like if they were talking badly about Scientology, then we just couldn't be in contact with them. And we just always had to put Scientology first. And Yeah, it was just totally normal, to be honest.
So for 4 years, you
Mm-hmm.
essentially don't see your parents. You don't see your brothers either.
Right. Yeah. Well, so one of my brothers wound up in Clearwater when I was there. He was on, because he had gotten into trouble, and he was on what Aaron was describing yesterday as the Rehabilitation Project Force, the RPF.
What had he done?
He basically like had slept with another girl his age, and they weren't married, so that's like not allowed in the Sea Org.
So they don't want premarital sex.
Yeah, not at
Ever.
all. That's like one of the worst things you can do. So the RPF, basically you wear all black. You have to run everywhere you go. People aren't allowed to talk to you. You aren't allowed to speak unless spoken to. You basically have to do 5 hours of interrogation a day to find out all the bad things that you've done. You actually have to do a special kind of it where you have to find the evil purposes that you had that were behind the bad things that you did. And then you do like extremely heavy labor and that sort of thing. And it usually takes years. So my brother was assigned to that while I was in Florida, and he came to Florida. And so he was on that program. So I did see him. And then from there, he left the Sea Org, and I was like sort of supposed to handle him to not leave for a few months before he actually wound up leaving.
What do you mean handle him?
So my brother leaving was kind of considered by the most senior group in Scientology as something that would be bad PR for my family.
Right.
Right. So they wanted me to talk to him and like sort of like beg him to stay. And so for me, it was the only opportunity I could get to talk to my brother.
Did you ever see him when he was in this black uniform running around?
I would see him running by.
But you can't talk to him.
So
really.
I can talk to him, but he couldn't originate communication to me.
Did you try to originate communication at all?
All the time. I would talk to him. Anytime I saw him, I like went through all these hoops to like get to be close to where he was. Like he was doing this one thing called the purification rundown. I had heard that. So I like went through all these hoops and told kind of all these lies so I could get onto that auditing procedure myself, only to find out that he wasn't on the same schedule as me. So I was doing all sorts of things so I could talk to my brother. But I also like when I saw him, it would be in front of people, and it's like there wasn't time. He was going somewhere. He would be unaccounted for. So it was just like quick things I could say to him when he ran by. And so when I was asked to handle him to stay, it was like I could talk to him for like a half an hour at least. And it's something they're not even supposed to do. Like they would never task somebody with convincing somebody else to stay in Scientology or the Sea Org. But I guess they considered it important enough in this instance that they would do that. But in the end, all that kind of wound up happening was that was kind of the first time I thought about not being there. Like maybe it would be nice, or even maybe it would be good for him to not have to be here because he obviously doesn't like it.
What are you, like 14, 15 when this is happening? Yeah,
I was 14 and he was about like 22 at this time. So at first I would just be like, I don't want you to leave. I will never see you again. And then he was, and then he finally was like, I don't want to talk about that anymore. Like, I'm going to go, I'm going to leave. And so then we would just like chat, but I would pretend like I was trying to convince him to leave. And so then he finally wound up leaving.
How did he do that?
I mean, they let him go. They realized
Just walked off.
They arranged for him to stay with a certain family. And yeah, I guess they figured that he was going to be more trouble. But he was still going to be a Scientologist, but not in the Sea Org. Yeah. So I guess they realized that they just couldn't convince him to stay. And so they put him with a Scientology family. And so I remember like being really sad when he was leaving, because I still, like, he was still the one person in my family that on some level I had lived with. Even though we didn't live in the same room for a while, he was the person who I saw every day. At least I didn't see my parents every day. And I really you know, had looked up to him, and I was really sad that he left. I remember I gave him like my CD player and all this, but then, you know, I didn't even know where he was after that. I didn't know how to get a hold of him.
So even though he's still in Scientology, I'll get to that in a minute,
Mm-hmm.
because he's leaving the Sea Org and because your family is who you are, you're essentially disconnected from him if he leaves.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So then a few years later, a sister of somebody who worked in Clearwater, who was in the Sea Org, they like knew where my brother was. And then so I secretly talked to her, and she gave me his number. And I like so you can't make a phone call when you're there. Like, you have to have a code in order to call outside, which you could only get if it was part of your job.
This is the late 90s right now, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like you have cell phones and there's no landlines, you're saying.
Well, there were landlines, but they were like
normal ones.
Internal phones, and you had to enter a code on it in order to get like outside of their internal phone lines in order to just have it be a regular landline.
Were you thinking that could be tapped if you did that too?
Well, so I borrowed somebody's code that you're not supposed to, because they track it. Like, they can see.
Oh, it's not like a universal code. It's
a different one that's assigned to a person who might need to use it for their job. Like, if their job is like ordering toilet paper for the whole base, then they have permission to to have this code. But they track every number that is called from that code, so they know who it goes back to. You know, they track it on the phone bill or whatever. So I use that to call my brother. But you know, by the time, it was maybe a year after he had left, and by that time he was just pissed off at the world. He was like, I don't have a sister. And he was like, you're there with Ronnie and Biddy, who are our parents, and you know, you guys are all happy together. And I was like, what the fuck? I haven't seen them in years. I'm in Florida, they're in California. So yeah, I didn't speak to him for many years after that.
And that's the one commonality in a way from your life. Like, the one thing that was always there, for the most part, at least in the background, that you now don't have. And you're on an island by yourself. Your parents aren't around. Your grandparents aren't around. Your brother's now gone. You can't talk to him. You know, if he left the Sea Org, though, and stayed a Scientologist, you know, I'm just curious, when you were having the conversations before he left the Sea Org, did he mention or hint at, you know, that he had an opportunity to explore some realities of the outside world during those conversations?
I mean, he was still young, so he was telling me that he wanted to be an actor or a comedian or something like that, and just he didn't really seem to believe in Scientology. Oh, so when I before I was 2, he was 10 at that point. So he had actually had he went to school, and he was in the outside regular world. And I think even since that time, he never wanted to be there. He had said it for years. I just didn't know that he was saying that the whole time.
Because he knew.
Right.
He knew.
Yeah, yeah. So I almost think it's worse for somebody who has a taste of the regular world.
Yes.
And then has this big change into something that's completely different, much more strict, and all the things that go with that. Where if it's all you know, that's your normal.
I mean, good for him for having an understanding of that, because we were hearing from Aaron yesterday too, you get groomed into it when you're a kid, even if you're in the real world. So you drink the Kool-Aid, you know, you're taught from your parents or whatever. So your brother somehow was able to at least be like, damn, I liked playing baseball or something like that.
Right. Exactly.
Actually feel his emotions, which that's got to be really hard to do in that type of position. So good for him.
Well, it's almost harder to feel your emotions, though. That's torture.
Yeah. And
he wanted to leave since he was 10 years old? So we're talking about when he's 22. So basically that entire time wanting to leave and not being able to. That's your whole childhood.
He must have felt like he had a prison sentence that he didn't know when it ended.
Right. Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
But he still doesn't leave all the way, when he leaves the Sea Org, he still says he's a Scientologist. Was that just to like, because he was afraid of the alternative, meaning like in name only, or did he actually still, you think, believe in some of the concepts of Scientology?
I think he believed in some of them, but in the end, if you leave Scientology, you will be declared a suppressive person, which sounds like, okay, who cares? But actually, everyone who you've ever known your entire life can now no longer speak to you. And imagine growing up somewhere where you have no education. So most Scientologists work for other Scientologists. So how's he going to get a job without an education, without knowing anybody? You can never speak to anyone in your family. He wouldn't have been able to speak to his own twin brother. And like, you know, so where do you go at that point, you know? So it's not just this label of disconnection or suppressive person. You lose everything.
But he's at least losing, in his situation, a big piece of that because he left the Sea Org and because of who he is. So he really isn't able to talk to his family, but is at least able still to converse with a lot of the people he knew from Scientology, maybe.
Right, and he's allowed to get opportunities from other Scientologists. Yes. Yeah. Which you need, like, you know, you don't have any credit, you don't have any money. So, yeah. So having those connections is everything.
So people in Scientology, like, does Grant Cardone carry a credit card? Right? Like, he has to.
Well, so it's different. He didn't grow up in Scientology. He grew up in the regular in the regular world. So that's why sometimes my experience is maybe different than his. And and different, like, my experience is obviously different than Tom Cruise's. But, like, no, I had no credit card. And so when you grow up there in the Sea Org as a cadet, it's like if you leave, you're losing everything. Now, if you join as a 30-year-old and you've lived in the regular world and then you decide to leave, then you have whatever you had before that, maybe minus a few years of connections.
So like a Leo Remini or a Danny Masterson who weren't in the Sea Org, but they were in it when they were a kid.
Exactly.
They have access to the real world in a way that you don't.
Right. So Danny Masterson, Danny Masterson grew up in a house with his family, with a mom and a dad, went to school. So it's just completely different experience.
You ever seen those videos? They're actually like really cruel, but the prank videos sometimes on TikTok where the family, like the parents and older brothers and sisters, will put the little kid under a blanket, and when they lift it, they act like they can't see them, and they're like, holy shit, he's gone. And the kid's like, wait, what? And he's like going up teaching them and trying to talk, and they don't see him, or like maybe they feel him and they're like, holy shit. And then the kid starts freaking out because like they start crying every time because they're like, I'm invisible, I can't be seen. It's like actually really cruel. But like it's a similar, when I picture it, it's a similar type thing to the people, like in this case, your brother, who now that's kind of like if you passed him on the street, you might look at him and be like, but you got to keep it moving, or per 1,000-yard stare and pretend you didn't see him. Yeah. It's like a ghost.
Yeah, yeah. And that's how it is now. So like when I first started speaking out about Scientology, everyone who I knew in my entire life, my parents were already out by this point, and I left with my ex-husband. So it's not like I had nobody. But if I didn't have that, then I would have been fucked.
Alone.
Yeah. But everyone who I ever knew my whole life, everyone who I grew up with, they don't speak to me. They still don't. Like, so it's just like, especially if you grew up without a family, like that's a huge deal.
Oh, yeah. Everything you knew.
Yeah.
All right. So your brother leaves, gets put with this other Scientology family. You're 15 years old, something like that at this time.
Yeah.
And you said you were at Flag training from 12 to 16.
Right. Yeah. But then at some point I wasn't training anymore. I had a job, which was to run programs into the hotels that were there. So like, you know, making sure the rooms got cleaned in time and making sure that,
the hotels?
So like in Florida, where they deliver Scientology services to the public, they have hotels there where the public stay while they're getting services. And so that, you know, they make money from that, for them paying for the hotels and buying food there. So that's its own organization, is the one that takes care of the buildings and takes care of the gardens and takes care of the hotel rooms and maids and that sort of thing. So my job was to like if there was an area of that wasn't functioning well, I would have certain steps that I was supposed to do to get it back on track.
And this is, I would imagine this is like a part of the whole real estate empire that Miscavige owns in Tampa, or in Clearwater, essentially, right?
Right. Yeah. Kind of. Yeah. Sort of. Yeah. So later on, when I was in Scientology, I actually worked for the part of the organization that acquired the buildings and did designs on them and raised the money for that. And I mean, I just did the designs and I did some of the drawings for the designs, but I worked in that department too. So that's more like part of the real estate empire type thing.
So you would draw things. So you had creativity.
Yeah, I would. And yeah, so in that office, that's kind of when I drew stuff when I was a kid. But
when
like,
you were very little.
Yeah, but I would just like, yeah. So like sometimes when we would work at the international base, we worked in the food department, and like, so like I would like, there were like little papers that you would put on the table for executives where they would vote for the service. That was someone's statistic. And so I'd like draw pictures on the vote sheet, and like sometimes my uncle and my Aunt Shelly would vote for my art. So yeah. So I guess I did like drawing, but I didn't really get to do it much. Like there wasn't downtime, but that was a way I could do it at that time.
Yeah, there's some sort of like natural creativity at least that exists in you that you could get in touch with.
Yeah, for sure. Specifically when I worked in that real estate type area, we learned things like Photoshop and CAD.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, and then so I would do like hand renderings like of the spaces and things like that. So I didn't really know it, but that's kind of like the type of person that I am.
Yeah.
And I noticed it at that time because I was like, wow, hours and hours can go by with me working in Photoshop doing the design boards, and it feels like nothing. Like that was the first time that I did something that I kind of enjoyed.
So you find your passion a little bit doing that.
Yeah, but then it also kind of got crushed at the same time because every design you do, like, it takes like ages for it to get approved, and then it's like, so it's kind of both. Yeah.
You said that when your brother left and that process where you had to try to pull him back in, you said this a little while ago, so correct me if I'm wrong. But that was the first time where you started to think about potentially what life might look like without Scientology. Were you starting at that point? Because like you don't have anything, I'm trying to remember, like you don't have anything to base it off of because you never lived in anything else. But were you resenting being there at that point? Or were you just like, well, there are other things I'd like to do and maybe I would have to not be here to do those things?
Well, so at that point, it just started out as sort of empathy for him. Like I was like, it's clear that he wants to do these other things. And you know what? I want him to be happy. And even though it's bad that he wants to leave the Sea Org, it actually isn't that bad. Like, why is it so bad that he wants to be an actor or that he wants to be a comedian? He is funny. And so that doesn't seem like he's hurting anybody. And there's plenty of other people here that can do the job that he won't do. So that was the first time I was like, it's not so black and white as they say. He's not bad because he wants to leave. He just doesn't want to do this. Yeah. And like, let's be honest, it's not always that much fun. And so, yeah, but I think shortly after that, I became friends with this one kid who was in the cadet org at Flag in Florida. And it was run differently there so this whole time I was in Florida, I also couldn't speak to my mom because she was on the RPF at the INT base. But I wasn't allowed to tell anybody that because it was a big secret because she had previously been a really high executive in Florida. And so it would just be bad PR for my family. So it was like this kind of secret and this thing that I was kind of upset about all the time, but couldn't really do anything about. And so I became friends with this one kid, and he would like ask things.
Is that on here or there?
I wonder if it's mine.
No, it's me down.
Oh,
For some reason, it rings through my computer. It's my bad. It's been happening now. Like, that didn't happen for like 200 and some episodes, and now here we are. Sorry about that.
No worries.
That cut you off.
That's okay. So I became friends with this one kid who was in the cadet because he was in the classroom with me, and he would sort of like ask questions. Like, he was like, "Well, do you really believe that you're a Thetan?" And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "I can't believe you just said that." And he would just say stuff like that all the time, and no one had ever said that before. Like, I was like, "Yeah, of course." I was like, "Is anybody watching? Like, you say that?" And then I guess it was and he'd be like, "I don't really know if I am." Because so in the cadet org that he grew up in, they weren't automatically slated as Sea Org members. But because the ranch was near the INT base, it was like we were going to be Sea Org members no matter what. But for some reason, like, they got to choose. And like, you know, they kind of still lived in rooms with their parents. So it was just a different experience. And so he would be like, "Do you really think that you're a Thetan?" And I was just like, I mean, yeah, I always thought that 100%.
That's what you've been taught since you were a baby.
Yeah, exactly. But I was just so shocked that somebody was questioning that. And it was somebody who I liked and who was like normal. And then that was the first time that I was kind of like he would say things like, you know, "You don't seem that happy. Like, you guys are just like running around doing your job, but you guys kind of look pissed off all the time." Mm-hmm. And I was like, no one ever said that to me before. And I was like, and then I started thinking things like, am I happy? Do I like this? Like, and yeah. And because I was in a more senior organization when I was there, we were like not allowed to fraternize with people in lower organizations. But many of those people I had known since I was a kid. And so it was like I was always getting in trouble for that. And there was always all this pressure on me because of my name. Like, they basically like wanted you to act like a snob. It was part of the rules of the organization that I was in.
It's like a caste system, essentially.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you were like nice to people, you would get in trouble for it. So it's like very confusing. And so I think on some level at that point, I kind of realized like, yeah, I never really thought about if I wanted to do this. I never really thought about if I liked it or even if I believe in it. And I think that was the first time I was like, gosh, maybe like I don't, like it was the first time I considered not being there, like if I really enjoyed it. And then, so like he also like had, like his dad lived in Italy and he would sort of tell me about some of his experiences that he had there in the regular world. And that was like, it didn't seem so scary, you know, when he would tell me those things. And also by this.
Didn't seem so scary.
Yeah, like, you know how before I said we were told that, like, you know, psychiatrists would try to drug you if you went to school. Like, it didn't really seem like that was happening to him when he would go and visit his dad. And, yeah. And I guess there were also a few other things going on at the same time. Like, my grandmother, who was not in the Sea Org, but was a Scientology public, so she would pay for services. She lived in Clearwater, and if I had a day off, which was very, like, I probably had, like, I mean, in all the 4.5 years that I was there, I probably had, like, 10 days off. She would pick me up, and we would, like, go eat places, and
how would you know you had off if you didn't have phone privileges?
I had a pager. So, and sometimes I would see her on course. Like, for a little period of time, she was on course with me. So it was like kind of fun when she was on course with me. And so, like, you know, I would like go to the movies with her, and my aunt lived in town who also was not in the Sea Org. So actually being around them was kind of the first feeling I had of family. Like, when I had a day off and I told them, I was like, I'm going to have a day off, they would be so excited to pick me up. They would be like it was like as if I was like a celebrity, and it was like exciting for them. And like my grandma would like send me Easter baskets to the place where I worked, And I never had that before. Like, I mean, I didn't have a tooth fairy. You know, when I had my birthday as a kid, like I wasn't with my parents. I was still at the ranch. Now, sometimes on the weekend of the day I would see them, they would bring a birthday cake. But it wasn't like, there was like no party or anything like that. And so like getting an Easter basket or like getting all these gifts from my grandma or like that was just like the first time I kind of like experienced like family.
Well, you mentioned very early in the conversation that you would get together on like Christmas with the family, and now you're mentioning that your grandma would send you an Easter basket. So these are Christian holidays that are being celebrated in some way. Did you ever wonder like what that was? Like, oh, what's Christmas? What's Easter?
So for sure, but I was like, I would have to be like a moron to question it vocally because I was like, this is what I'm looking forward to. I will not, I don't want to cause any trouble there.
No more Christmas for you.
Exactly. Like I wasn't going to complain. I was just like, awesome.
Cool.
Yeah.
And you had said you got really close with your grandma during this time. I see why. Obviously, like she was there and the one of the few people there, and like you're looking forward to spending time with her. But did you ever have any deep conversations with her about Scientology itself?
So she would occasionally say things to me, like little complaints. Like she would be like she would say, like my Aunt Shelly would try to recruit my cousins for the Sea Org, and she'd be like, she's not very nice, you know. She was mean to your cousin, and I didn't like it. And I would just be like, Like
Don't talk about Shelly that
I would just
way.
act like she didn't say anything. Or she would like sort of like, she had like, previous to Scientology, she had been a nurse, but for some reason they wouldn't let her be a nurse because I guess maybe they thought that it would like have some sort of liability if something went wrong. I don't really know why, but she'd be like, Dave won't let me be a nurse. I don't really know why. It's all I want to do is be a nurse. Or she would just like complain about certain things like, you know, like her exercise program would be run by like the highest level, like the people who worked for my uncle. And she was like, well, I don't want them to control what I eat and my exercise, because she was like a little bit overweight. So I think it was seen as like bad PR for the family. Well, there was a lot of that. Like I had like bad skin when I was a teenager.
That's bad PR.
It was like literally Shelly told me, she was like, you need to go get your skin treated. Otherwise you're going to have to change your name. And it was already.
Imagine. Oh my God.
I mean, at the time, I was like, fair point. But now, that's like how brainwashed I was. But now, as a mom, and I have to put my kid's face on mine or put, like, to see it like that. Because when I look back at it, I'm like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. I'm fine. But when I put my kid in my position, I get disgusted and pissed off, and I can see it for what it is. But that's kind of weirdly the only way I really can.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's like you're going to spend, I would imagine, like throughout your life, there's always going to be something in there that gets deprogrammed, right? As you see new things that you didn't see as a kid. Like it could be random little things. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. It could be 30 years later, you know, since you left, and you'll be finding things.
All the time. I mean, we have that all the time. Like, just something will happen. We'll be like, God, I never really, like, thought that this way of thinking was from Scientology. Yeah. And, yeah, it's kind of nice when that happens because it's like, you know, I guess on some level it's going to take, I mean, I still was there for more time than I've been out. And so it's like so you can't undo all that in a second. Sometimes it will take just as long for everything to go away as you were in there, you know?
Did you know who like the president was when you were in there?
I did, yeah.
Did you know what he was? Like what it meant?
Not too much, no. I was just like, he's the president.
Yeah.
But
I'm just thinking a random question, like all these little things I take for granted. They're like,
no, but like I was totally out of touch with that or anything. Like that just seemed like the fake world, and I was in the real world.
Yeah. Who's this George W. guy? God damn it! Why are we going to Iraq? What's Iraq? So when you were 16 and you stopped doing the training, what did they do with you after that?
So so all of a sudden I was like sort of like taken out of my daily work, and I was started being interrogated, which was a regular occurrence for me. I was always interrogated, but I was being interrogated by like the most senior person on the base. She was in the same organization as my uncle, and I was just getting asked all these questions, and I was like I was on watch day and night, so meaning somebody would sit outside my door to make sure I didn't leave. I didn't try to escape, and I was like so when I wasn't being interrogated, I was scrubbing the bathroom and like, or listening to L. Ron Hubbard lectures that were all about how you have to confess to all the bad things that you've done, or else you'll become like a horrible person and go into some, anyways, whatever. So
that'd just be playing in the background.
Well, I had a period where I would listen to those lectures, and then I would be scrubbing the bathroom, and then I would be getting interrogated. And then I wasn't allowed to talk to any of my friends. I was moved into a separate room, and like it was even to the point where if like I would eat meals in the bathroom, because if my uncle, like basically they'd be like, well, if you pass by your uncle, then you will upset him. So you have to basically hide in the bathroom and eat your meals. That wasn't every time, but that was like I would say at least a third of the time. And I didn't really know why. I mean, it wound up being because my parents had left the Sea Org, but I didn't know why until after like a month or two of this. I was randomly brought to LA without saying goodbye to any of my friends or my grandma. And I was like I was put on a plane. I was told I was going back to the international base, but it wound up being brought to a building on Hollywood Boulevard. I went to the top floor, and then Mike Rinder and Marty Rathbun, who were very high officials in Scientology, I was put in that room, and then I waited for seriously 4 hours for them to come into the room. And then when they finally came in, they basically told me that my parents had left the Sea Org and they were living in Mexico, and they wanted me to go with them. And I was like, leaving now. And
they left the Sea Org, but not Scientology.
Right. And he was like, I was like, well, are they declared suppressive persons? And he was like, no, blah, blah. And I was like, be real. And he was like, well, yeah, if you leave the Sea Org from the international base, you're automatically declared a suppressive person. But because it would be bad PR for the family, they're not going to be issuing a declare order on them like they would for anyone else. So, whoa. And so I was like, so basically if I go with them, then I'll be declared. And he's like, well, we won't be issuing anything, but yeah, it will basically be the same as being declared. He was leveling with me. And I had dealt with Marty over the years because of different things with my mom and whatever. And so I think that on some level he was doing me a favor. That's how I thought, by being real with me. And then so you're
still so young too.
Yeah, totally.
You're not 35 years old or something. You're still essentially a kid.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, and by the way, all those years that I was in Clearwater, we went to school at the Scientology cadet location for 1 day a week. And still no grades. So there was essentially no schooling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not like I was educated on the world or anything around me. So to me, the idea of going to Mexico and going to a public school. So for one thing, it's a country where I don't speak the language. It's somewhere where I've never been.
Do you know what Mexico was?
I mean, only knew because there was lots of Mexican people who were training in Florida when I was there. And so they would tell me about their country, and I was always hearing about someone's country and how beautiful they were. Well, because most of them weren't Sea Org members. They were staff members. So even though they were getting paid nothing, they at least maybe had grown up in the regular world a little bit, and they had I don't know, they had a chance to see their country, I guess. unlike me.
Mexicans in Scientology. You don't think about that.
So many.
So many Mexicans
Yeah.
in Scientology.
So many Mexicans in Scientology.
Really?
Largely
Absolutely.
because they want to come to the United States, and you can get a religious visa.
It's
So
true.
they don't actually believe it. Like, we will do the landscaping way.
So a lot of them, like maybe not the ones that were in training, but they wound up working for the hotels that I later was running programs into. But not like Russians, Romanians, Hungarians, Australians, British people, like from all over the world.
So at least I gave you a concept that there's, these places out there.
Yeah, almost
To
that was
some-
like that was like my only concept, kind of. Like
but it's something.
Yeah, and it was kind of actually that part of it I later missed when I left Scientology a little bit, when I was just like it was like this feeling that I had friends or knew people all around the world. But then, I could never talk to or see those people before. I mean, again. So, yeah. But anyways, so the idea of going to Mexico with my parents, who I now had maybe only seen once in the last 5 years. And those 5 years, meaning those years last forever when you're that age.
Yeah.
Like 5 years can go by in 2 seconds now that I'm this age. But at that time, that's like everything. That's your whole puberty. That's like, it seems like forever.
What year is this meeting with Rathbun in LA and Rinder?
It is, I think, at the end of 2000.
So this is when, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So at that point I was like, well, no, I don't want to leave. I was like, I'm never going to see any of my friends again. I'm never going to see my grandma. I'm never going to, I don't want to go. In my mind, I would be so behind in school that it would be totally embarrassing. And then they were going to try to inject me with drugs. I don't know. And I would I would just never be able to see anybody who I knew or cared about again.
So you had a concept, though, that you'd be behind in school.
Yes. Yeah.
So even though you
Definitely.
really hadn't been on the outside, you already understood that the education you had received, big air quotes there, was shit.
Yes. Yeah.
That's impressive.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
I'll take being behind in school as being impressive.
Yeah. No, seriously, because you don't know, you've never been in one.
Right.
What do you? I don't know how. I don't think I would ever think that in your position, because I'd assume my school. I'm like, well, they probably do it different out there, but I learned.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah. So I just thought it would just be and then it was with my parents, who basically at this point I didn't really know.
Yeah.
Or care too much about. I definitely didn't hate them, and I would have wanted them to be happy, but it was I didn't even.
You didn't really care.
Yeah. They were just other people who kind of on some level, my family just caused me problems. So in my world, I was friends with all these people, and my job was what it was. And in everyone else's mind, everything I did was bad PR for my family. And it was this whole narrative always being projected onto me. But I didn't get the benefits of being in this family. I wasn't really losing anything by not being a part of that family. I didn't get anything from it. It was just what everyone else thought when they looked at me, because my name was Miscavige. And so, so my parents, I don't know, it just didn't feel like I knew them at that point. And I was just another problem that my name is causing for me.
Yeah.
And it was just people looked at me in that way, which had nothing to do with who I actually was or what I was trying to do. So I was I basically said I didn't want to go with them. And
But they wanted you to come. You were told that through Marty.
So, yes, but I was just told it in that moment.
Yeah.
And then they were basically okay, well, then you have to handle your parents to let you stay. Well, at first they tried to tell them, and my parents got angry. And then they said, well, you have to talk to them. And then when I talked to my mom on the phone, she was basically she said, I was going to let you stay. But when I said, well, what about Jenna? They said, she's leaving with you. And she said, well, what if she doesn't want to? And they said, well, we don't care what she wants.
Oh, whoa. That's heavy.
Yeah, and that planted a seed in my mind at that time. Although it was for something that I already knew. I guess everyone else in the Sea Org, I felt like could do good work, was allowed to do good work, and they could maybe get promoted accordingly and have their own path. But I was almost never allowed to work. I was always put on training because I was just always everything was just about making me not be bad PR for my family. And so when she told me that they said that, I was like, it was just another example of how unimportant I was to them, except for what I represented to other people. And it made me wonder if I would ever be able to do anything that I wanted to do, or even help achieve the goals of Scientology, or if I would always just be treated in a certain way because of my family name. And so that planted a seed. But then, looking back at the time, I'm like, well, why would my mom say she was going to let me stay? Because I was a minor still, but my mom also grew up in Scientology. So at the time I thought that it was nice that she said that. And so I guess my parents wound up agreeing to let me stay because a similar thing had happened to my mom when she was young. Her parents tried to take her out of the Sea Org, and they succeeded for a while, and she wound up hating them. And I honestly think that they were right about that. I guess I'm just that amount of stubborn and bitchy that I probably would have, I think I would have hated them.
Yeah.
And resented them. And it's almost better, even though it happened many years later, that I came to it on my own.
Well, I had asked you early on about the concept of love between you and your parents, and we were talking about in your childhood when you were growing up. But now you're 16. Like you said, you've seen them once in the last 4 years?
Yeah, once or twice.
For a few hours or something?
Yeah, once I saw my dad, and he was that was when he told me why my mom got in trouble because she'd been having an affair, and I was it was just I was almost handling him because he was upset. Right. So yeah. And then I saw my mom once when I was supposed to convince her to stay in the Sea Org. So it was kind of the same thing. I was just I was the parent in these scenarios. And any letter that I had received from my mom had to be read in front of this high Scientology official. What? And then taken. Yeah. So because she was on the RPF all those years when I was in Florida, and because me having a letter from her would be bad PR. If anyone saw it, if they knew that she was on the RPF, she would give me the letters from my mom and make me read them in front of her face. And then I would have to give them back to her.
How personal were these letters?
I mean, they were today I worked on this project that we were working on. I did this auditing, and they were I love you very much. And I had told her early on, I was tell me if you need anything, because on the RPF, you only got $12 pay. And I also got only $12 pay, but I just felt bad for her that she was having to do this program. So I was if you need anything. So sometimes she would be if you could send me a hat, that would be nice.
Oh my God.
And but because she was saying the projects that she was working on, it was considered that other people weren't allowed to be seeing that. And so it was actually a big deal for me at the time. All I kind of wanted to do was have the letter from my mom and put it under my pillow and be able to read it at night before I went to go to bed. But it was I wasn't allowed to do that. And then I wasn't allowed to talk to anyone about it. And it just and even my aunt and my grandma would ask me what was happening with my mom. And it was if I talked about it, I would get in so much trouble. So it was just always hiding it from everybody.
So you felt like you'd get in trouble even if your grandma and aunt were asking you, which kind of elicits the idea that they want to know and this is between us, and you still were uncomfortable.
Yeah, because they weren't even Sea Org members. I would have gotten more in trouble for telling them than I would have with other people. But who's
going to find out?
Honestly, probably I would wind up telling. Or they would wind up telling. Or they would be clueless and mention it in some communication to my uncle or something, and he would be how do they know? And so, yeah, so someone would wind up telling.
So your mom would say, though, in those letters, she would like mention "I love you very much" and stuff like that, and you had such a kinship to just something as simple as the letter that you'd want to sleep with it under your pillow or something. So you still feel something during this time period, and yet when you get to 16 and you find out they leave, it's almost like, all right, this has just been such a stress. Like I don't want to go with them. This is a weight on me. So were you at a point, maybe also because like the age you are, the hormones are firing and everything, where you're
right.
and you don't
and
even
there's
know
a
what
boy
that
I
is.
liked too.
Ooh,
so I was like,
was.
oh, I wasn't going to see him. Well, yeah, but he was in Florida where I never went back to. So that was kind of a bust. And I never went back to Florida. I didn't see my grandma. I didn't see any of my friends
You
there.
never went back?
No.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
But you don't, point being, even though you were going through these emotions and everything, now at this age 16, when this meeting happens to be happening, it's finally like the way I'm picking it up, and correct me if I'm wrong, like you resent them.
Yes. I didn't think they were bad people, but I was like, this is annoying. Like you're just fucking with my life. And I think it's just because of so many years of me saving my mom's gum wrappers in my bottom drawer, saving like any letter she ever sent to me, that like when I was at the ranch and she was far away. It was like anything, like I would even like if they gave me like a stuffed animal, I would like have to sleep with them all in my bed. Like and so many years of when I was a kid, dreaming that I was like having a day off with my parents and then waking up and it was just like Groundhog Day, like get back to work. So I think I just like had so much of that I just finally had to like disassociate in my mind and be like, okay, this isn't happening.
That's
like,
the word.
Yeah. So just stop hoping, because that's crushes you. And then it was just like, yeah, I don't even know them. Like they have nothing to do with me. Let's be real. And that's, I mean, all evidence pointed to that, like I didn't spend Christmases with them. I didn't like.
There's a barrier that creates an inability to actually bond and know someone, even if you're blood tied to them and want to love them. Like at some point that's going to build up like a powder keg. I understand completely. I don't understand experiencing that, but I can understand what you're talking about. Yeah. So during this time period though too, like you were mentioning early on in the podcast, when you were a child, David would pick you up and take you to hang out with Shelly, but when you were in Florida, you had said a little bit ago, like if he was coming through, you'd have to eat in the bathroom or something to avoid him when people in your family were in trouble. But did you have any real prolonged interactions with him at all during that time period?
Right. So the time when I would have to go in the bathroom, that I would only have to avoid him because I was in trouble. But they were actually in Florida for many of those years when I was there. And when they were in town, my Aunt Shelly would bring me into the office and talk to me for hours.
For hours?
Yeah.
About what?
She would mostly talk to me about like, my training. She would talk to me about health stuff. She would talk to me about girl stuff. And so the organization I was in was called the Commodore's Messenger Organization. And L. Ron Hubbard is the Commodore, and we were people, and we were supposed to be his messengers anyways, even though he was dead, I don't know. It's too much.
I feel you.
Anyway, so she had been a messenger from a really young age. Like she would always tell me I was a messenger from when I was 9 years old. And she would sort of always try to mentor me. And like, I don't know, like she was almost like a mother figure. Like my mom, like she would talk to me about my period. She would talk to me about health. She would talk to me about all those sorts of things. She would even say things like, in my experience, lots of boys marry girls in CMO, but then they take advantage of them and they use them to get to a higher level. It was kind of weird. I was like, is she talking about Dave? Like, I don't know. It was, or she would talk to me about my aunts and my grandma. And so like, it was like she was family, but I also knew that if I pissed her off, then it wasn't like, it wasn't like I had some kind of special treatment. And then Dave would come in and out of the office and he would show me stuff, make jokes, and he would like, ask me questions. He would like complain about people, but it was like nice and friendly. But at that time I called him sir. And, you know, and I knew how he was. I would see him getting angry at other people. I mean, even the times when I visited my mom in Florida, like, you know, we would, before I went to Florida for good, we would like watch movies. We went like, did like mini golf together. Like, I mean, those were like seeing my mom and how they lived and how nice their rooms were and how well they got treated. That was something that, compared to how it was at the ranch, made me be like, oh, I want to be a Sea Org member. I want to be an executive in Scientology because they get to do all this fun stuff. But I didn't realize, you know, they were being treated much differently than the average Sea Org member.
Well, I was going to be asking you, I think you kind of just answered. I just want to make sure, you know, learning basic things about, you know, what it is to be a woman and all the things that go with that, and learning about boys and natural urges you have. It seems like Shelly was your main resource there. I mean, because she's also, we've talked about it throughout this conversation, but you didn't have really a lot of people older than you. So it seems like the few times where you were able to, in an extended environment, be able to talk with someone who's older than you, you were kind of lapping that up, you know, getting whatever you could get.
For sure, but the actual people that I was talking to were my friends. Like those were the people who I would talk to about boys or my period. Shelly I would talk with her about that too, but I'd be like, yeah, I got my period 2 years ago, but thanks for talking about it now.
How did your friends, like, where did your friends learn it from if they grew up in the ranch too?
I mean, I actually don't know, but like, if like when I got my period.
Divine intervention.
Like when I got my period, like that's who I like borrowed a pad from or a tampon. Like, and then eventually, or like we would go to the store together and like we were like shy to buy like tampons or whatever. And so I would like put it in her basket or something, or they were older and so they didn't care. But like that's who, like, so Shelly would talk with me about it. I never talked to my mom about it. And she would talk about health and things like that. And it felt motherly because she was somebody who was my mom's age and somebody who I knew since I was a baby. But like it wasn't really like, it's not like what I'm doing with my daughter right now. Like my friends were the ones who were there every month when I got my period. Yeah,
you can do it the right way. I mean,
right.
Man, that's wild. So would you say that you know, you had been saying that some people would say like, oh, Shelly can be nasty and stuff like that, but like, did you like her, or was it just like a nice escape to be able to talk with someone for hours, regardless of who they were?
It was definitely a nice escape to be able to talk to someone for a few hours, but also I liked her a lot. Yeah. But also like, you know, so looking back, you know, I thought that, I guess like she would say things to me like she would tell me when I was with her, like, you know, no, like she would be like, I guess she would be like complaining about my dad and how he would like always send me letters, or he would like try to call me all the time. And she would be like, oh, he's always been obsessed with family. But she would be like, but no Thetan is really the parent of another Thetan. So he just has a weird obsession with that. And she would tell me that, you know, or she would say things like that. And I thought she was being nice and helpful, but really she was kind of talking shit about my dad. And, or like she would like, I don't know, say things about my mom. Like I would tell her that I was like kind of really worried and upset that my mom was on the RPF. And I felt bad for her because she had been in such a high executive position and then kind of like got busted. And I remember when I first found out about it, all these people were like, well, we're not friends with her anymore. I don't have respect for her. And I thought that would be really hard for my mom to experience. And I like that part of it hurt me more than not being able to see her. And Shelly would be like, well, she always bragged about being the strongest woman on the base. And she'd be like, and she's doing fine. Like she would just kind of like, and like, she would just say critical things about my parents that at the time felt like they were trying to be comforting. But looking back, it's kind of messed up. But then I guess it's kind of a little bit sweet too, because I think she maybe was jealous that they were my parents, and on some level I feel like she wanted to be my parent, like so I don't know. It's just kind of the whole thing's like kind of messed up and mixed feelings, and I don't really know what to think about it. It's all just messed up.
Do you think, of course it is, but do you think that some of it could have been her, how do I want to say this? Well, maybe it could have been like she's also trying to intentionally brainwash you, or...
But it's not considered brainwashing to her.
Right, it's not.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's the second thing, and you tell me if this is the second thing I'm going to bring up here. Or she's so brainwashed that she can't see that she's doing it because she's tortured into drinking the Kool-Aid in a way.
It's definitely that for her. Yeah, she's definitely so brainwashed that I do think that she thinks she's doing me a favor, but subconsciously,
yes,
she has this other drive that she doesn't really understand. But talking to me, which makes no sense because I'm not her niece,
right? Because
we're just Thetans.
You're just
so it's like confusing. Like, why is she singling me out to talk to me for hours every time? Because she's not my aunt, but acting like my aunt.
She's talking out of both sides of her mouth.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it was just like kind of confusing. And, there were times when I got in trouble with her when I was in Florida. It was like...
For what?
So like, so it started because I was talking to this boy during course time, right? So we were like flirting, and I got in trouble for it. And there was like a thing going through that a bunch of people were getting in trouble for that. And they tried to take me off of my job and assign me to doing heavy labor. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. I've already done enough heavy labor in my life. I was like, make me. And then,
don't mind if I do.
So then I wound up getting into, so they were trying to make me. And then I was trying to call my parents at the int base because I was like, just trying to go to them for something. Like, I was like, maybe they can give me some advice or something. And I was probably about like 15 at this time. And they wouldn't let me use the phone. Like, I kept trying to pick up the phone, and I would try to call, and they would hang it up. And there wound up being like 5 people like holding me down. Like, each had one leg. One was like a security guard. The other 3 were like women in the organization that I was in, and they were just like physically restraining me from calling my parents. Mm-hmm. And then they wound up parking someone outside my door all night, stopping me from... like if I were trying to escape, even though I had nowhere to escape to. But like, so I was in trouble, and then I got pulled into an office, and I was in there, and Dave walked by, and he was like, "Are you in trouble?" And I was like, "Yes, sir." And he was like, "What for?" And I was like, "I got into a fight." And he was like, "Unbelievable. No more special treatment for you." And I was like, anyways, well, I was scared, but I was also like, special treatment. Yeah. I was like, anyways. And so then Shelly came in with 2 other, like the other most senior person on the base, and then 2 of my seniors, and basically was like, said that what I had been doing by like flirting with this boy and talking during course, it was like 1 down from having sex in an auditing session, which is like the worst thing you can do in all of Scientology.
Wait, so people would go into an auditing session and get it on?
Well, very rarely. Well, I don't even...
Only Sonny Pereira.
Oh. It's like a fetish. We're gonna go audit and fuck.
I don't think very many people did it because it was like the worst thing you can do. It's like when she said that, I was like,
we need to make a YouTube video on that. Find someone who did it. I'm in for that.
Sonny Pereira.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. So, and basically she like yelled at me for like 10 minutes in front of all these women and said that I was this close to being assigned to the RPF, and that she had been a guardian angel to me. And like she showed me all of these reports, because in Scientology people write reports on each other. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they'll get in trouble for not reporting on you. There are just all these reports on things that I had done, and she said that I was just like a disgrace to my name, and that I had to receive a confessional from the girl who was like the highest executive on the base. I had to be under full-time watch, and I had to do this one program that was kind of like where I would do certain studies, and it's a thing that you do when you're in CMO, but it basically would do the laundry of all the executives and clean all their berthing and iron all their shirts and stuff. I had to now be on that program. And so and that went on, and I was like, and then every week at staff meeting, I would have to get up in front of the group and say how horrible I was and like say what I was doing to fix it. And I would just get like screamed at like a million times a day and treated like crap. And I wasn't allowed to talk to any of my friends. You know, there were no days off. And so it was just like a period of like when I was in trouble. And she was, you know, she was the one who caused that. So she did mean things as well.
Yeah.
But and she said at that time, she was like, I was the reason why the ranch was created, and that it was my fault that it all went wrong. And I didn't.
What did that mean?
So at the time I was like, huh? Like I was 6 when I went to the ranch. I was like, couldn't get over that in my mind. I was like, what a thing to say. And I didn't realize it at the time, but basically like a few weeks later, all of the kids at the ranch who were there with me, who I grew up with, showed up in Clearwater and were all put on posts there.
What?
Put on jobs. Yeah.
Just at once.
All at once. So they were shutting down the ranch because basically
the feds moved in?
I think some people were like, do you know anything about this, Aaron? There was like some German, like, I don't know, news thing that was like circling helicopters. And I think that
I thought you were going to say Colonial Dignidad or something. They were like drawing comparisons.
There was a German documentary crew who had flown a helicopter over the Int Ranch. And they had come to learn about the place where the kids of the international management executives were, well, essentially being held. You know, I mean, yesterday we talked about the idea of Scientology being a human trafficking cult, and I mentioned an example of why I thought that way. But her story and the story of all the other kids is a much better explanation of how Scientology. You have kids who aren't being educated.
Oh, this is no question. Yeah.
They're not being parented. They're being put to work, menial labor, hard labor. They're not being paid. They're not being cared for. And even most of her story is occurring when she is a child.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
well, all of my stories, I mean, I was 21 when I left. So everything that's occurred is essentially when I was a child. Yeah. And so all these jobs I had were all when I was a kid. And all these kids that came over from the ranch were 14, 15, 16-year-olds. And they were put on jobs like moving counseling folders from one place to another, like being course supervisors, being auditors. They were all put on jobs and were working for the Sea Org for $50 a week and 3,000 miles away from their parents.
Yeah.
So the ranch was being disbanded. I just think that it was because it was a danger to have this many minors not being educated, and they could be put to good work. You know?
Oh, yeah. We could use their labor somewhere else for sure.
Exactly, yeah. So I didn't know that had been happening, but I was the cause of it. Like, it was just like, she was blaming me for it being disbanded.
Yeah, it's like the gaslighting.
Right.
Your entire life is insane, but like.
Exactly.
It seems like there was a real Rubicon crossed when your parents went, that suddenly they needed to now say, you're at fault for this. Like, did you ever seen, when I was a kid, I read the Harry Potter series. Have you read that now?
So while I was in trouble during this time, before my parents left, honestly, like the person who was watching me clean the bathrooms was reading the Harry Potter books and would tell me the stories. And honestly, like, that's what got me through. Like, that's my escape.
Wow.
And like later when I was in LA, when I was like in a room by myself, like not allowed to see any of my friends and family, like I stayed up all night reading Harry Potter. And honestly, like, it makes me emotional. It sounds ridiculous.
No, I understand.
But like it got me through, like it was just like this other world that I could escape to, that it's still like my favorite book. And like reading it to my kids is like so meaningful because it like just got me through crazy times. Like it really, really did.
Well, you remind me of like what they did to Harry. Like the aunt and uncle hated his parents who died.
Oh,
and
right.
so then he had to stay with them, and they said, you're staying in the cupboard below the steps. Fuck you, Harry. and they treated him like shit. And it feels like, to me, that's just the parallel I'm making as you're talking. Like when especially when your parents went to leave and that Rubicon gets crossed, your brothers left the Sea Org as well. They're like, oh, well, she's here, so we'll take it out on her in a way.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's true. Definitely.
And you're only like 16, 17 when this is going on.
Yeah, I was 16 when my parents left.
So they start taking, you're still like in heavy contact with Shelly, but they're getting you in trouble and things like that. Like, what kind, did you take on some kind of formal role when you were 18, 19, 20 at some point within the organization?
So once I went to LA after I found out that my parents left, and they wound up allowing me to stay because I convinced my parents. For a couple of months, I just lived in a room by myself, and I was studying this course that was all about how essentially they were saying that my parents were suppressive people and I was the effect of their actions. And in order to remain in good health and to stay there, I would have to not have communication with them. So I wasn't allowed to answer the phone. I wasn't allowed to get any mail. I ate at the table with this executive, and I was just under full-time watch until finally, after several months, they allowed me to have a job. But I still wasn't allowed to answer the phone or anything like that. But I was at least allowed to live with my peers who are my age and eat at a table with them. Because to be honest, that was the hardest part of it. It was the isolation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and just studying in a room by myself all day under a camera. So that was just like, the isolation was the hardest for me. Studying was nothing, and all the other stuff was like nothing, but it was just the isolation. So after a few months, I was finally able to have a job, although it was like the worst job in the world. Well, not really.
What was it?
Oh my gosh. It was just the most boring job you could ever have. It was a word clearer. So I was like, basically like, if people weren't doing well on their job, I was supposed to find the materials that told them how to do it right and find out what words they didn't understand and look up definitions with them. And there's all these different techniques that you use to do that. And that was my job.
Sounds not fun at all.
It wasn't fun. My office had a camera that went directly to the most senior executive's office. Like, she would basically be spying on me all day.
You're living in the Truman Show.
Yeah.
Like, that is really not much difference. And I know it's not only you. There's other people who are having the same types of things, but especially because of who you are, the level of it.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
They're like, oh, don't let her know anything and make sure she doesn't do anything wrong. Keep her there.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many like undercurrents to what's going on. Like, the entire time all this is happening, I'm literally always being interrogated. Yeah. Like, I'm never not being interrogated every day. Like, on the e-meter, you know, in rooms where you're not allowed to leave unless you pretend like you had some kind of realization about how great it was. You know?
When you get interrogated, they're asking you all the things. They're basically asking you to self-report on anything you could possibly done wrong, and they're doing this to you every day. So did you? I don't know if you're in the middle of it. I don't know if you can feel it, but now looking back on it, did that put you in some form of psychosis where it actually did wire your brain to just say whatever they wanted you to say, including things that, you know, are stupid, but even true, that maybe you did wrong, that, you know, just to make it stop?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because I had always been being interrogated, like, on some level I was hardened to it, where I would just give them something that was like boring, that would get me in the least possible trouble. Like, you know, I really wouldn't give them something unless I wanted to. And in the end, it's like, if I didn't want to tell them every single thing about me personally, I could be like, well, I was supposed to be selling books, but instead I lingered and I told a joke to my friend. And that's a much easier thing to say than maybe something you really did that was bad.
Yeah.
Like, that they would consider really bad. And so I think that, ironically, because of how often I had it, I knew how to manipulate it a little bit. And like, for me, it was like, yeah, saying that I feel great and I had a great realization is a very small price to pay to get the fuck out of the room.
Oh, yeah.
Like, so what kind of idiot wouldn't say that if they wanted to get out of the room?
Yeah.
It would, like, so on some level, it made me believe in it less because it was like, yeah, you just have to say what they want to hear. Or you can give them this instead of this, and it will be fine. And now it didn't always work out that easily because I was struggling in my mind, like, okay, I should give them this thing that I really did that they would think was bad. But yeah, so.
So you did give them some things that, like, were objectively bad, like a mistake you made along the way. That
yeah,
did
along the
happen.
way. But then at the end, like, I was just pissed off at them for constantly interrogating me. It was against their own policies. And at that point, towards the end of the time I was there, I just got like more and more pissed off, more and more angry, started leaving the room, which was like end of the fucking world if you did that. Like nobody else did that. And I would just like have to fight my way out. And I just became more and more like I'm not like unable to deal with these things anymore. Like,
what do these rooms look like? Are they a normal room? Well, this isn't a normal room. This is a studio. But like, is it like a normal conference room?
No. It's like a small office room. So it's like about a sixth of this room, and there's like a desk and sitting across from each other, and then there's an e-meter on the table, and they all have cameras in the room. And when you're talking, they're writing down everything that you're saying, and they're asking the e-meter if you did things, you know. So if they're like, have you ever said anything bad about your uncle? And then they see if it reads on the e-meter. And if it doesn't read, they have all these questions that they ask. And your needle either has to like float, like go back and forth in this smooth way, or it reads, but you have to. So if it doesn't float, you have to get an answer. And then once you give an answer, if your needle doesn't float, which is the goal of everything, you have to find an earlier similar time you did that same thing. Until you have a floating needle and a realization. And then they re-ask the question until your needle floats upon asking the question. And then at the end of every interrogation session, they ask you a series of questions that are like, did you directly try to influence the e-meter? Did you tell any half-truths? What else did they say?
Untruths.
Yeah, any untruths, all sorts of...
Untruths, that's the term?
Half-truths, untruths. Were you waiting for a more specifically worded question? Was there some question I should have asked you that I didn't ask you?
Right.
All these sort of things to cover the ground of how you might have evaded answering questions earlier in the session.
I see why you were saying yesterday they're good.
It's an effective interrogation technique.
Yeah. I mean, on anything we are talking about, like, to be honest, we're glossing over the most simple aspect of it.
Sure.
Like, there's so many aspects of just being on a Scientology course. Like, the amount of times you get checked on the meter if you went past a word. You get like quizzed once a day on what all of the words mean, and if you get it wrong or if you hesitate, you have to go back to the beginning of the course. You also get every policy you read, you get checked for what. So there's like, so when we say we're on course, there's still all these other undercurrents of things that are going on that are so complicated, that keep you so busy and preoccupied, you hardly have time to question anything.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems like what it is from the beginning. They're just constantly having you be busy so that you're trained not to think. It's very, very eerily reminiscent, maybe certainly I guess with less of like the death knell over it, but it's eerily reminiscent to like North Korea. When you hear people talk about that, you're taught what to think, how to think, where to be, don't ask questions, and if you do, go fuck yourself.
Right, yeah. And you're never like even alone. There's never anyone who you can talk to about real questions you might have. You're never alone long enough to even be able to think these questions on any given day. It's all those spot checks. It's all the interrogation. You have like 12 cleaning stations. You have like all these other duties. You have like so many statistics you're supposed to keep up with and mark on different graphs that get inspected daily. Your birthing has to be clean. Your shirts have to be ironed. Your shoes have to be shined. It's like just so many things going on that you don't even have a second to like try to figure anything out or what you even think about it.
So when you went out to LA, you said you had liked the boy back in Florida,
Mm-hmm.
but you never went back to Florida.
Right.
So that was history.
Yeah.
But you did end up meeting your husband former ex-husband in Scientology, right? So that was in LA?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Was he in the Sea Org with you?
Yeah, he was in the Sea Org there.
Was he your age too, or?
He is 4 years older than me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so were you working with him directly and that's how you met, or?
No, he was in so I was in like the senior org and he was in the lower one. So he had to like call me sir.
He had to call you sir?
Yeah, or like Mr. Miscavige. I don't, for some reason they said Mr.
You're a woman.
I know, but like even like at the ranch, we called all the women like people who were senior to us. So like the adults at the ranch, they were our seniors. They weren't our caretakers. They were our bosses. And so we would have to call them sir or Mr. whatever if they were a woman. I don't even really know why. Do you know why?
It was a rule that L. Ron Hubbard created, and it's weird because that's not even the way that it is in the Navy. L. Ron Hubbard was in the Navy, so a lot of these Sea Org rules are supposed to be patterned after the Navy. For whatever reason, he specifically said if female officers are to be addressed as sir or Mr., and that rule just applied to also females who are in senior organizations. So like in the Sea Org, I called my wife sir.
No.
Yeah. He would have had to call me sir.
Oh, that's so weird. Like, have you fucked that up in the real world where you walk in and you talk to some woman and call her sir?
No, I haven't.
Good for you.
But I remember one time when we were like me and a bunch of kids were at my parents' apartment when we were still at the ranch. I was probably like about like 10 or something, and then the guy, it was like me and 3 other young kids my age, and the guy from downstairs, like he came up and he was a non-Scientologist, and he like came up and he knocked on the door and he said that we were being too loud and that he had a baby sleeping. He had a knife in his hand. He was like, "You guys better shut the fuck up. You woke up my baby." Honestly, now I can relate. Like if anyone woke up my baby.
Oh my God.
Just joking. I can't really relate. That's psycho. But he was like, if you guys make one additional noise, then I'll be back. And me and the 3 other kids were like, "Yes, sir," all at the same time. It's just we called anyone who was older and a boss sir, but he was like a non-Scientologist, and I could tell that he kind of thought it was weird that we all said that at the same time.
Yeah, he's like, oh, okay, all right. That was exactly what I was looking for, but wasn't expecting. Exactly. Yeah, that's so strange that you had to do that. So when you're first like flirting with who's going to be your husband, he's calling you sir.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Very romantic.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you guys I'm just curious, like how much do you even understand? Like, I guess that's a natural human inclination, but like romance inside an organization like that, is it robotic like everything else, or did it flow a little bit for real?
I mean, I guess both things happen to different people, but like, so people in the Sea Org usually get married young because you can't have sex before you're married, and you can't like do anything besides like maybe like a little bit of kissing, and it is a natural human inclination.
Yes.
And so like people get married as young as 14, 15, like everyone does kind
14, 15.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I did get married when I was 18, but it was only because they wouldn't allow me to get married earlier.
So you met him when you were 16, right?
I met him when I was 16.
And how quickly were you guys engaged?
I mean, probably we're in a couple months. Yeah. So like.
Very quickly. Yeah.
My wife and I, when we got married in the Sea Org, we were engaged after a few weeks.
Yeah, that's normal.
And again, it took us a few months to get married, but again, only because they wouldn't let us. Yeah. We had to jump through some hoops.
Yeah.
Totally normal.
Totally normal.
Do you feel love, or is that just like puppy love?
So, like, at the time when I look back at it, I think that there is a stronger urge to get married because I lost all my family. I lost all my friends, and I just wanted like my own little family. And you also get your own room. I'm not saying it was all about that, but like you don't have to live in a dorm with people, so you kind of like get to like have your own things in there a little bit. And so it's like this natural urge to maybe just sort of have one person who might be on your side a little bit more than other people. And yeah, it's something like that.
Yeah, I understand that. But like, do you think looking back on it, you felt love, or it was more motivated by the necessities?
I mean, I was 16, so like I did feel love, but like, and attraction.
Yeah.
But I also think that it was very much motivated by not feeling like I was alone in the world.
Mm.
Like I remember having these moments when I wasn't with my brother or my parents and any of my friends. I just remember thinking often like, God, I wonder if I could just like disappear and nobody would notice. Like, or is anybody really thinking about me? And like, you know, when I didn't see my grandma or my aunt again, it wasn't like I couldn't call them. Like we weren't writing letters and we weren't writing emails. So it was like anyone could just disappear, and everyone always did just disappear at any time. You know, you would see someone for months and then you would be gone or they would be gone. It just didn't matter. All that mattered was the organization. So I think like having somebody who is like legally your family member and who you live with, like having that was like just kind of like having a family.
Yeah. But you're also inside of a part of the organization, the Sea Org, that as you laid out and Aaron was explaining last night, like they don't want you to have kids.
Right.
Like they encourage against that. But did you have like an urge like that would be cool too to have kids? Like did you want to be a mom? Did you feel that kind of, you know, feminine instinct?
So at that time I didn't.
You're young at that time, but eventually.
Yes. So eventually I did. And I can tell you about why that came later. But he actually had wanted to have kids. I mean, he had joined the Sea Org when he was 18, but he had gone to regular school.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest attractions was that he would tell me stories about like growing up with his cousins and how they would ride motorcycles and go to the beach. And he had a car. And he's like, so he would kind of like, it was almost like the Harry Potter thing all over again.
Yes.
I would get to like hear these stories of like characters and escapes, and I loved that. And that was kind of like my favorite thing about it. And yeah, he was a really nice person. And so, yeah, that was like kind of addicting. And then we wanted to get married, but then they wouldn't let us get married because they thought that my parents would insist on coming to the wedding, and they were like kind of declared, and it was like all confusing, and it would be like a danger to the church. They thought that maybe they would meet someone in his family who had expressed some discontent with Scientology and that they would like conspire together to take down the church. And so they wouldn't let us get married. So we wound up having sex before we got married.
Did they find out about that?
They found out about it because he wound up confessing to it.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what happened? How'd you guys get in trouble?
And you know what? So, and the reason why I'm bringing this up was because at this point, I was at the stage where I didn't tell them. I was getting interrogated every day. And I was telling them.
I stood tall in there, motherfucker.
Exactly. Well, and
I'm hard.
Exactly. Well, and I would be like, and I feel really bad because I didn't work hard enough. But really, I was like, we had sex. So, like, that was just an example of me, like, not really. So I wasn't in the habit of giving everything. Telling them everything I did. I was just in the habit of getting through these confessionals.
But you've also been like, I don't mean to get like a little too personal here. So if I am, we can back off. But like, you've lived in a completely emotionally repressed environment for 17 years. Right. Your husband at least had lived in the, well, not yet husband at the time, but going to be,
right.
Had at least lived in the real world. And sex is like the most emotional thing a human being can do. So in doing that, did something like unlock in you a little bit? Like, holy shit, like minus like, oh, this is great, you know?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think that it did. Like, I think that at some level, like when they started trying to separate us or say we couldn't get married, I was like, it had also, I had been separated from people so many times already that I kind of like went crazy. I was like, no fucking way are you guys doing this again? Like, I was like, I've learned all your fucking tricks and you will never, ever do this to me again.
Don't you cross her, Aaron. I could see that look in her eyes. Don't you cross her, man.
So, like, when they found out, they wound up, like, separating us. They, like, took him to, like, somewhere where I didn't know. And they tried to have me do heavy labor and interrogation. And I was like, fuck you. I'm not doing it. And I spent the whole next, like, 2 weeks, like, literally busting down doors to find him. Like, literally.
What does that look like?
So, like
I'm picturing you knocking down doors, but...
Yeah. So I knew that the senior most official knew where he was, and she wasn't telling me. And when I would knock on her door, she wouldn't answer, and so I would bust down her door. And then I would look at her, like, TV camera thing that she had to everywhere, and I would look at the papers on her desk, and I would see, like, I would see that it said Dallas Hill, and I saw that he was being, like, his confessionals were being done by somebody who I knew where they worked. So then I would go down to their office and I would bust down their door.
Oh my God.
When they wouldn't let me in, and I'd be like, where the fuck is Dallas? And then they would get in their car. I would follow them to the car. And then there were only a few places he could be. There were only a few Scientology buildings at the time. So there was, like, the L. Ron Hubbard Way. I worked at the one on Hollywood Boulevard, and I lived, you know, above the testing center there. So I lived and worked on Hollywood Boulevard, and I checked all the rooms there. I checked everywhere I could. I asked all of his coworkers where he was. I was literally just, like, walking around being followed by somebody, but I was, like, causing a lot of trouble and a lot of, like, embarrassment for absolutely everybody involved. And then I would walk from Hollywood Boulevard to Sunset Boulevard on L. Ron Hubbard Way, and I would be like, where the fuck is Dallas? And I would follow security guards around. And so then at some point, like, a really high official in Scientology, because I was causing bad PR, this is, like, literally the only thing they care about.
Yeah.
They came down and tried to talk to me, and they said I could talk to Dallas on the phone. And I was like, Dallas, where are you? And he was like, I love you, but, you know, if we get through our program, we can be together. And I was like, that's bullshit. They tell me that about everyone, and I've never seen them again. And I was like, just tell me where you are. And he's like, well, if I tell them, I won't ever be able to speak to my parents again. And so basically they're threatening him with his family, so he won't tell me where he is. So basically, like, at that point, I wound up literally, like, hanging myself out of the window of the 5th floor building on Hollywood Boulevard and saying, like, if you don't bring Dallas here, then I'm gonna let go. Because and on some level, I'm like, okay, would I really have done that? And I'm like, I did have nothing to lose. Like, I had no family. I had none of my friends. I didn't have Dallas at this point. And I did believe that I was a Thetan that would come back if I died. And, but at the same time, like, my motivation was that, like, I can't find him by looking for him. They could just be moving him one door down every time I see him. But if I do this, that's going to look really bad on them. Like, this is literally all they care about. They don't care if I die. They don't care if I'm in a horrible state of mind.
They care how it looks.
That's right. And if I die, the police will come. Mm-hmm. I'm the niece of the leader of Scientology. They won't want this. And they brought him there. They brought him there. Right.
Like, the security, like, dragged him in, like, oh, here he is.
Yeah, and the executives that were there. Yeah, they're like, he's here. Yeah. And then, and I was literally like, okay, tell me where you were. I still stayed out the window. I was like, tell me where you been hiding. And it was basically in the basement of the blue building. He was being security checked. He was being watched day and night by security guards. Mm-hmm. He was being security checked by this one gal. She also, like, had audited Katie Holmes and stuff. So she was, like, known for being good at security checking. And, like, you know, they have certain people who are, like, known for being really aggressive at being able to get people to tell everything. And so she was, like, one of those main ones. And they'd been threatening him with never being able to talk to his family again. And and basically from that point on, I was like, okay, well, I'm not like, then I came out. of the window. And I was like, they tried to separate us again. And I was like, no. I just like was like, no.
So they tried to like drag him away?
Yeah.
You said, I'm going back to the window now?
No. I was like,
yeah.
Now everything we do, we're going to do together. Like, and they tried to pry us apart.
And because of who you are, they ended up letting this happen.
They wound up letting this happen because I was a psycho, basically.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Seriously.
I mean, honestly, there's nothing else in the entire world that would have ever worked.
Yeah, no, this is like a whole different scenario. See, like in the real world, if we heard something like this, we'd call you like a stage 5 clinger. In Scientology, this is brave.
Yeah.
Because you should never have to do something like this. Like they're taking someone from you for no reason. Like just because they want to torture you. Like it's crazy. So that, I mean, that the bravery it takes to do something. I mean, put your body out there too, and also like say, I'm gonna let go. You better make this happen. Like obviously, if they let it happen, they must have been pretty. I don't know if they can be moved, but they must have been pretty shocked by the situation. Like, you know what? Fuck it. We're not dealing with this.
Yeah.
I've never heard a story like that within Scientology.
Yeah. It is pretty weird. Yeah. And I think on some level I was also a stage 5 clinger looking back, because like maybe that's how stage 5 clingers are made. Like you like constantly get abandoned throughout your whole life, and like that's like the only thing you have.
I think you could be forgiven for that. I think we're okay with it. But so you were still 17 when this is happening, though, because you're not married.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, I was.
But
17.
you get married when you're 18.
Yes. So yeah, and the whole reason we weren't allowed to get married was because they thought my parents would cause an issue at my wedding.
Yep.
But my parents didn't even know that I wanted to get married. So they wound up like they brought us to Big Bear and had us be on watch by these 2 people full time, getting confessionals. They were kind of trying to take me to an outdoor environment because they thought I was psychotic. They were trying to take me like kind of like into the wilderness to like have my mind calm down and like be normal again. And so we did that for like a month. And then I was like, okay, let's go back. Like I kind of was like, all right, what's my punishment? What's going to happen with all this? Like, and so they posted Dallas at a different base, which was just, but not far away. It was the one on L. Ron Hubbard Way, and I was on Hollywood Boulevard.
And you could see him.
I could not. Like, I think that was a little bit part of their plan. And then I worked in the thing that we talked about earlier, which is like the real estate area where I would do like design work and renderings and stuff like that. And basically, I wound up convincing one of the executives that, like, I guess they brought me to the int base one day. Like I had to go and they basically were like, we just want you to hold on a little bit longer before you get married. Because we're just, it was had something to do with like the Lisa McPherson trials. Like that was part of like, you know, because that was going on.
Yeah.
If I had like done something publicly, like it would just be a PR disaster for them, and they felt like it tied in somehow because they're paranoid about absolutely everything. And so they just wanted me to hold on a little bit longer until that was over.
Yeah.
And then, and I was like, well, look, I don't think my parents will even want to come to the wedding. They were in the Sea Org. They understand. So maybe if you'll just let me write them a letter, then it will just not be a problem. And so and they were like, okay, fine, maybe. So I wrote a letter. And it was like, I didn't even say I wanted to get married. I just said that I had a boyfriend, but anyone who had been in the Sea Org knows that if you have a boyfriend, you want to get married. Yeah. So it was kind of like a secret message, like subliminal thing, like where my parents, they wound up looking at it and being like, oh, she probably wants to get married. And they wrote back and they said, oh, we're happy for you that you met someone. We don't have to come to the wedding. Like they kind of did the math on it probably. Yes. Yeah. So, and so when they wrote back, they basically kind of were like, had their tail between their legs. They're like, they had made this problem go on for years. And they were like, showed me the letter and they're like, so are you just going to like go get married today? Oh, no. So at that previous meeting though, I said, okay, fine. I'll wait a little bit longer if you bring Dallas back to the base where I'm at.
There you go.
So they did it. And then when the letter came back, they were like, oh, so you're going to go get married today? And I was like, yes. And then so
where'd you guys get married?
So we didn't have a wedding. It was very hard to get approval to even go down to the courthouse. Like, they made it hell. But they finally approved it, and we had like 2 hours off. And like Dallas had a old ass red truck, and when we didn't have enough money for gas, so on the way there we had to get gas, and we only had put like $5 in, and the key to the ignition was the same as the key to the gas tank, and it broke off in the gas tank, and the gas, like, you know what I mean, and it so we put the gas in. We managed to fish that out. I seriously put the half of the key into the ignition and put the broken part and turned it, and we went to the courthouse. And we
really wanted to get married. Good for you.
Well, we were kind of like, is this a sign? And I was like, at that point I was like, it was good enough reason just to shove it in their face to get married. So anyway, sorry.
No, it's all good.
The psycho.
It's all showing. Not at all. I get it.
Yeah. So we got married at the courthouse and then went back to work, and then that evening,
the same day, you just go back to work, get married, go to work.
Yeah, totally. Well, so in order to be officially married, you do have to have like a little ceremony where the minister signs it. So his family came up from San Diego, and we got off post. Well, we got a break from our jobs at midnight, and we went to the Celebrity Center, and his family was there, and I was still wearing my uniform, and I worked in the design office, and I made design boards, so I used spray glue to to make the design boards, and it was all caked on my shoes. I looked like a psycho, and he was in his uniform, and we went there at midnight, and then his dad, because he was a minister in Scientology, he did the ceremony on us, and then so we were married. And then we went back to post. So none of my family was there. There weren't any pictures. There wasn't any wedding dress or food or anything. It was just 30 minutes. And my best friend was there and another friend of mine. They were also in their uniforms. And then
your best friend from the Sea Org, or
yeah, at that time, yeah. And then we went back to post because at that time, we were working on evolutions that honestly. We were required to stay up all night and sleep under our desks for 2 hours and then get back to work. So we were working through the night many nights in a row. So we just went right back to our jobs right after that.
When you were getting married, in the actual ceremony though, were you happy?
I was relieved, and I was it was also kind of weird because his family was there and they were all they were Scientologists, but they were it must have looked crazy to them, and they were had their babies there, and they were yeah, I guess I was just I guess I was happy that it was finally getting done, and it the ceremony did mean a lot to me. I wanted it talks about honestly, I don't even remember what it talks about. I guess in Scientology they have this triangle, and they talk about it in the ceremony. It's the ARC triangle, and it's affinity, reality, and communication. And all those three things add up to understanding. And it talks about and it talks about not going to bed when you're upset with each other. And I guess it was I finally accomplished this, and I won, and I could be with somebody who I loved, but there were little fissures in our relationship already.
Already at that point.
Well, because he told on us.
Yeah.
And continued to do so because of the threat of never being able to talk to his family again, which was something that was very important to him in contrast to how I felt about my family at that time.
Very different.
So I couldn't understand it.
But he also experiences his family.
Exactly. He grew up in a house with his family. He went to school. They took care of him. And so that was always kind of a through line, even when we left Scientology, because his parents were still in Scientology, and they saw me as somebody who was keeping him out of Scientology. So I was the devil.
Yeah.
And him having to choose between his family and me constantly just wound up just kind of, leading to the eventual demise. But I mean, it's not really a demise if you're married for 22 years. Like, it still can be a successful relationship.
Yeah, I understand.
But yeah, that's
you
just...
had kids too. It's a great thing.
Right.
We'll get there.
Yeah, yeah.
But so you get married in like 2002. You're 18, right?
Yes.
Something like that?
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't leave till 2005.
Right, the end of 2005, like November.
Okay. So after you got married, what was the build-up to 2005 with you leaving? Like, how did it happen? Were there specific things you witnessed that suddenly like made it click? Because I asked that because it's very clear that at this point you at least fully subconsciously know this place is really fucked up and I would prefer not to be here, but you almost like haven't admitted that fact out aloud to yourself.
That's
Is that
right.
fair to say?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so the base that I was at, you know, it became where we were staying up all night to do these evolutions for things that had to get done to meet deadlines. It became like, you know, things became increasingly like people were getting treated worse and worse. And they started enforcing rules for the sake of rules. Like, they weren't even things that were L. Ron Hubbard policies. And because I was now to a point where I was kind of like seeing things for how they were, I was like kind of like, I couldn't unsee it a little bit.
Yep.
Like, I was like, I'm here because I care about people and I want to make the world a better place and I want to help people. And everyone in my life, like, I knew my parents weren't suppressive people. There were other people who I knew who got declared suppressive people who I'd known my whole life. And I was like, they're not suppressive people. I know. I don't care what you say.
So you're starting to reason for yourself.
Yeah.
Effectively.
Right. Yeah. And I started to see that the people around me who I cared about were being treated terribly. And I was like, why would I care about helping some strangers out in the world who I don't even know when my friends are getting treated like garbage and being put on the RPF or being declared suppressive people, which is the worst thing you can be declared. Like, I was like, why would I care about some strangers when all the things that I can see with my own eyes are not, those people aren't being helped. And I guess I kind of started to believe only what I could see with my eyes, or started to actually believe what I saw with my eyes. Yeah. And then there was a period that me and Dallas were sent to Australia as part of a mission to get a new building for a church out there. But it was really like, they were really just like trying to get rid of us. It was like this, we were sent to Canberra, Australia, which was like the smallest failing Scientology organization. And
where is that like relative to Sydney? Anywhere near it?
It's a couple hours away, but it's actually the capital of Australia, but nothing is there. Like, anybody in Australia would be like, oh yeah, Canberra, like nothing happens there.
Like inland from Sydney?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And we were sent there because I kind of became more and more like problematic. Like, I started like butting heads. Like, they would come into the office and be like, you know, you have to turn off the music because, and I'd be like, why? Because it's against the rules to enjoy anything. And like, you know, they were trying to like take away, like, so some people had eventually gotten cell phones because it like, that's where technology was going. And then they tried to take away everyone's cell phone. And I was like, well, no, I'm not giving away mine. Like, try to take it from me. Like, what policy? And so I guess I became, or when they would try to make us stay up night after night, all the time, always, I was like, no, I'm going to sleep. I was like, who's coming with me? No one came with me ever. Nobody ever.
Because their last name is not Miscavige.
But not
Miscavige.
only, that's true, but I wasn't doing it. Like, I guess that makes me look like a jerk. Like, I felt like I could do that because I was Miscavige. But no, I got in trouble for it too. And I was willing to have those people's backs. And in private, they would tell me like, oh, I'm not giving up my cell phone, or, oh, I'm not staying up either. I mean, I was right. They should not have been made to stay up all night. So whether it was because my name was Miscavige or not, like, I was right and we should have been able to sleep. And I don't feel bad about going home and telling everyone that they should have gone home. And really, like, when people would get in trouble for certain things, being like they would go to the harshest punishment for them And I'd be like, well, what about training them for their job? You never did that. You don't even let them to do their job training because they're staying up all night. And so I was just like calling things out and being obnoxious. And like, so I think they were just trying to get rid of me. And so they sent us to Australia, and they weren't going to send Dallas with me, but I insisted that he came with me.
Oh, again, even when you're married?
Yeah, they always separate husbands and wives in Scientology. They don't care. So we were there for like a year, and it was clear that they didn't really care if we were getting anything done or not. So I had a little bit of freedom. We were like in the regular world. We had an apartment, and we were meeting Scientologists there, and like one of them who was helping us with our project had a couple kids, and one of them was 2, and we were with her often because we were working together. And we're also like cooking our own food kind of, which we were going to the grocery store, and we interacted with some non-Scientologists, and they were like seemed perfectly normal to me. And I was like,
So you had never really done either of those things?
Yeah, none of them. I never, and also like her little kid was so cute and like adorable and sweet. Like it was the first time that it was the first time I thought about having kids. Like I just, like she was so funny and crazy.
Yeah.
And like she was like kind of like my bestie, and like I would like carry her, which was like, that's like I think like carrying a baby is like something happens.
Absolutely.
If you're a woman, maybe.
Isn't it like there's like an oxytocin release or something like that?
I guess.
There's a hormonal, if I got the hormone wrong, correct in the comments, but there is something scientific there. Yeah.
Yeah, especially at that age.
Yes.
Like, so I was like probably like 20 at that time. And Dallas always wanted to have kids. He had the idea that the rule that you couldn't have kids as serial members would change, which was really fucking dumb. I was under no delusions that it would change. But I guess also knowing that he had family out, it seemed like there was a possibility that like if we left, we would have somewhere to go.
But they don't want a Thetan like you feeling another Thetan and feeling anything when you do that.
Right, exactly.
Let alone having one.
Exactly. Yeah. So when we finally came back from Australia, like the difference between living that way and like we would even like watch TV a little bit at night. And we had to like confess all that when we came back.
So you hadn't really watched like real, actual live cable TV?
No, we couldn't watch TV. No. I mean, we went to bed at midnight. We weren't allowed to have TVs. Like they would get confiscated if anyone ever got one.
Had you ever used like a computer or the internet?
So the internet was in a locked room at the end of a hall, and it had all this software on it that blocked any anti-Scientology sites or words or anything. And you had to get special approval from different people in order to use it, and you could only use it for your job. And so when we were in Australia, I actually like was in touch with my parents at that point. Like we would call them because we had an apartment that had a landline. And so I was actually able to talk to them a little bit. And even once, like, we went to this anti-Scientology site that my parents had mentioned, but they mentioned everything carefully. They never said anything like outright.
On the phone when you talk with them?
Well, they were like, oh, check out this site, but they weren't like, Scientology's evil and you're in a cult, because I would have just shut them down. So it's like you have to be so sensitive.
Subtle, absolutely.
Yeah. And like, I think most importantly, you have to show them, like, you have to not be the enemy. You have to be the place where they feel like they can always go to when shit goes down or when they want to leave. So just like being nice and loving is maybe more important than what you say about the cult.
Mm-hmm.
Just if you're the first person they think of when they have enough seeds planted that they eventually want to leave, maybe you'd be the person that they would go to. So they like maybe mentioned the site, but didn't tell us what to think about it. And then maybe told me one or two things that I knew to be true, so my aunt had been declared a suppressive person. And they told me the circumstances surrounding
Shelly.
It was my mom's sister, so her name was Sarah. Yeah,
because Shelly, that was later when she and she wasn't declared suppressive. She just got sent off, right?
Right. Well, she's still in the Sea Org. So she wasn't declared suppressive. Yeah. And so it was like, and they told me other people who had been declared, and I was like, oh, those people aren't suppressive. Like I already knew, and I was already kind of disillusioned. But so when we went back, things were just like starkly different. Like, it was like if people were falling asleep when we were listening to an L. Ron Hubbard lecture, they would be made to clean the dumpster outside with a toothbrush. And it was like people were just like getting screamed at in front of the staff meetings, and it was just so bad. And then I,
Can we go back for 1 second?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm going on a roll.
No, that's okay. Just I guess it's like 03, 04, something like that, when you're in Australia?
Yeah, I think it was like 04.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you check out some of these sites, like you were saying, that your mom had pointed out.
Mm-hmm.
What's that like to finally see something written there or in video form, whatever it was, that is peeling back the facade on what has been your entire life? Like, do you immediately take it as, oh my God, yeah, wow, how did I not see this? Or are you like, wait a minute, this can't be true, because it's like your whole life is a lie?
Right. That's a really good question, because at the time when I was looking at it, I was kind of like looking at it like don't look directly at it. Like,
don't look into the light.
Exactly. Yeah. And it wasn't until later when I had left the Sea Org did those sites make a difference for me, because actually somebody who I knew was posting on them later, when at that time I kind of didn't know what they were talking about. Like, they kind of used some terminology that I didn't really understand, but just the fact that there were people out there against Scientology, that I think is what made a difference to me. Like, that there was some dissent out there and people who had been in, that made a difference to me. But later on, when I saw people who I knew telling stories about people that I knew, then it made a huge difference to me. Yeah. But at that time, it was still kind of like I was afraid to look at it directly, and I was just like, but knowing that it was out there was important.
How crazy is that, though, that like you're so wired by them, even though you've been pushing back internally a ton and rebelling.
Yeah.
You're so still wired into this that you're, without even knowing what's on the other side of the candelabra right there, you're just naturally making yourself afraid to even look at it. That is so frightening to me that it can go that deep.
It's so true. Yes, that was absolutely the case. And there were other factors. Like, I didn't fully know how to use the internet, and then they used their like funny language that I didn't understand. Like, and then, so there were just a few things that couldn't make me really go all in and look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then when we got back to the base, it was just like, it was almost like I'd been living with some degree of freedom for almost a year now. And it was like a shit show, and everyone was psychotic there. And it was just so obvious that they were doing everything they could to make everyone there miserable. And they did not give a crap about their happiness or their well-being. And I like it was just something that I knew for a fact. Like, it was like, it's something that was undeniable. And and then so shortly thereafter I wanted to leave.
Now, how did that go down? And was your husband on board right away, or was that a tough conversation?
So he was on board right away. But so if you want to leave the Sea organization, you're not actually allowed to tell your spouse. It's considered a suppressive act for which you could be declared. But I did tell him, but he was sort of like, yeah. But he was like, but you get through your stuff. And then once you get through it, like, because before you leave, you have to do a whole interrogation and sign all this crap. And he was like, once you get through all that, then I'll leave. If you get through it, I'll leave with you. And so I was like, okay. So.
Now, that's just leaving the Sea Org. That's not leaving Scientology.
Right. Yeah.
But it's a big deal because of who you are, obviously. Bigger deal.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And they did a few last-ditch efforts to like try to give me a post that I would like. And so like
what?
So actually at that time is when I did my auditor training. And the reason I chose to do my auditor training is because at the crux of whether or not Scientology works is auditing. So I felt like it was the only job that I could do that wasn't like, hadn't been twisted by that, like that was only written by L. Ron Hubbard. And that was the way I could see if Scientology really helped people or not.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Scientology in its purest form. Like all the other jobs were like managing this person, managing this person who manages this person who manages. It was like all like so much red tape and ridiculousness, where I felt like if this didn't work, then it would be undeniable. And so I did my auditor training, and there's just more of the same stuff going on. Like I wound up auditing some people. Like there became new rules. Like people in higher level organizations couldn't be married to people in lower level organizations. And so like I wound up auditing, and I only audited for a month, but I wound up auditing somebody who was not allowed to talk to their wife because of these rules, and was trying to get through this auditing action in order to be able to talk to his wife he was so in love with. And it just became one thing after another. Like everyone was just getting treated like crap. And it didn't work. Like I didn't wind up being able to teach myself that Scientology actually works or helps people. It was the opposite.
That was the last ditch effort, and it just fell flat.
Yeah. And I was getting confessionals myself, and I wound up like meaning interrogations. And I wound up getting so pissed off in one that I left the room, and I had to like fight the auditor, and I had to like run down the stairs before they could catch me. And it was just like, and I got in trouble for this, and it was just more out PR. So then they were like, so finally it was time to leave.
I'm sorry, when you say fight, like physically get into
physically fight.
Is it a guy?
It was a woman. But so in Scientology, when you're training to become an auditor, you actually do a course that is all about how to physically force the person to do what you tell them to do. It's called like upper indoctrination training routines. And it's like, in one of the drills that you do is they try everything they can to get away. Like everything they can. It's like a whole scene in the classroom when it's happening. Everyone's watching. And you have to be able to, and usually like when I did, I was twin with this huge guy who's like 6 foot something. And they have to do everything they can to get away. And you learn to basically force them. And so when you're in an auditing session in Scientology, your auditor is trained to not let you leave the room. And you're not allowed to leave the room. And you know that. And so, and there's a camera. And on some level, you don't ever try it because you know the rules. But I just was like so fed up. I mean, I had so many more hours of confessionals than anybody else I ever knew. I was just so over everything. I was like, honestly, I think I was just like having a mental break at this time. And I was like, I did not care about the rules anymore. I just like wanted to get the fuck out of there. And like, so I crushed the cans to the e-meter that you hold, because I was like, if I crush them, then she can't do the session. Like she can't use the e-meter. And she still wouldn't let me leave. I threw my auditing folder up in the air. She still wouldn't let me leave. And we were just like fighting. And I wound up like being able to push her out of the way. I mean, this auditing room was like more of like an eighth the size of this room. It was tiny.
Whoa.
Like, and then I finally got out, and then I was like running to the back stairwell so that I could escape the building. And there was somebody like who, like, just as I pushed open the door on that led to outside, a security guard was just getting there and didn't stop me in time. And I like wound up like screaming like, leave me alone, get the fuck away from me. And they're like they just like knew at that point it was bad PR and someone could call the cops. But then it was kind of like, okay, well, I'm walking around here on the sidewalk now with nowhere to go. Like, who am I going to call? So I always just wound up having to go back.
So you go back into the building after that?
Oh, like where else would I go? I didn't
like
have
everything
a phone.
Normal. Yeah.
Well, I guess I would walk around all day until I like calmed down. And often there would be someone following me, trying to get me to come back. And I didn't have anyone to call, really. I didn't.
Like a teacher-like person, like, hey, come back, that kind of thing?
So at first it would be like an auditor, but then they would enlist my friends to be like, Jenna, please come back. This is good. And I'd be like, hey, stay out of it. They're using you, and I don't want to get angry at you because you have nothing to do with this. So just like, so it just, that went on for a little while. And then finally I was like, okay, I'm leaving. And they wanted me to get an interrogation. And I was like, and in order to get an interrogation, I had to do this other auditing thing. And I refused to do it. I was like, I'm never getting auditing again. I want the fuck out of here. But
who'd you go and tell this to?
It was the people in the Office of Special Affairs and also the RTC representative. Anyways, she was like the most important person on the base. And she
Was that Mike Rinder's office?
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, Mike Rinder handled my routing out directly and was directly involved. I did not know this at the time, but basically when I was like supposed to be getting my interrogation, they were taking my ex-husband aside separately, and he stopped like coming back to the room at night, and I was like, you're still leaving with me, right? And he was like, yeah, well, only if you get through your confessional. But I just like couldn't bring myself to do it, and I was like, and then he sort of like started changing his tune slowly, and I was like, well, who are you talking to? He was like, no one. And then it finally came to a point when they were like this went on for weeks, and then he was like getting weirder and weirder and more cold, and he finally said he wasn't going to come with me. And they were trying to force me into the confessional. I would just stay in my room all day. And then they tried to get me to sign this form that was like if I ever speak badly about Scientology, then I will pay however many millions of dollars. And I was like, I just like shredded it in her face. I was like, I'm never signing this.
Good for you.
And it was because I was also pissed off at that time that Dallas was starting to act weird, and I knew that they were doing something with him.
They're getting to him.
Yeah. And then so finally I was like, okay, well, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to leave without you. I was going to go to my parents' house. And at this time I did have my cell phone and I could talk to them. And they like couldn't, like when they said they were going to take it away from me, I said I was going to call the police. And so
he's threatened to call the cops.
Yeah. I mean, it was all like I was already in trouble. Like I was already doing the worst things I could do. I don't think that I really believed in Scientology anymore.
Yeah.
Like, so, and most people, they're leaving just the Sea Org. I would think I was like done with all of it. So like Aaron left the year after me. He left the Sea Org just the year after me. We left the Sea Org at the same time. But he continued
Stayed
with
in
Scientology. Yeah.
Right.
And so,
But you want to break free completely. You're like, I'm done.
Yeah, but it was easier for me because my parents were already out of Scientology.
Yes.
And so I wanted to be like, okay, all right, I'm going to leave without Dallas. And I was really upset. And I remember I was going to leave the next day and I was crying and we were like hugging and like he gave me one of his sweaters. And then he was like, okay, I'm going to take you to the airport. And then from OSA, the gal was like, no, you can't take her to the airport. You drop her in a cab and say goodbye and that's it. And then,
my God.
Yeah. And then, so to his credit, he was like, well, no, I'm going to take her to the airport. She's my wife. I'm not going to ever see her again. And she was like, absolutely not. And like started acting crazy. And then he was like, no, I'm going to take her to the airport. And then so she wound up like, so he had a car and he like was taking me to the airport. She was like, fine, I'm going to be in the car with you guys. So she was like in the back seat. Yeah. Then we like went to get something to eat. She was there the entire time. He was like dropping me off and saying goodbye. And I was like, and at that time I remembered something like as I was leaving in the airport, like about to get on my flight, I remembered something that someone had said to me, a very senior executive. He's like the third in command of Scientology. He was basically like, you know, like he was like, all we care about is how you're doing. Like Dallas can be thrown to the sharks. And I was like, if I leave, they're basically like, they're going to destroy him. Like he's just going to be in trouble. The only reason he hasn't been RPF'd or anything like that is because they know that I wouldn't let that happen. Yep. And so I basically wound up telling him, I said like, look, I'll stay and I will complete my program and I'll just stay. If you want to stay, then I'll stay with you. And then like it was kind of a tactic. at the time because I was like, I knew that all they could say about me was that I wanted to leave. And he kept turning it on me that I was leaving him. And so I was like, fine, I'll stay. Mm-hmm. And then he was like, started crying and basically told me everything that had been happening, that Mike Rinder and this gal from OSA had been interrogating him every single day. And they had been telling him how bad my family was. They have been making him tell everything that I ever said to him, all the things that my parents told me, like about Dave beating people and stuff that was going on at the Imp base. And he basically said, like, and if I left with you, they said that I would never speak to my family again. And then so then we like were told, the girl who was there, I was like, okay, we're gonna stay. And she was like, no, thank you.
Well, was she listening? Was she hearing this?
So she was there.
She's hearing the whole conversation.
Well, so she was there, and I was like, leave us alone. And then she was like, no, I'm staying right here. And in the airport, I was like, leave me and my husband the fuck alone. Get away.
So
this is out PR.
Yeah.
She goes away. Like, so if the second I started creating a scene, she would take a step away. And so we were able to have this conversation. So but she was calling Dallas the whole time. And I even I took his phone and I broke it in half and threw it in the trash and then
don't fuck up, Aaron. She got the biggest balls in this room. Just saying.
That was a long time ago. And so he was like, we want to stay. And she was like, no, thank you. It's like, they were like, so we went back and they were like, no, she can't stay.
She's got to go.
Yes.
We've already decided.
And they tried to separate us again. And he was like, no, I'm not being separated again. This has already happened.
I mean, the emotional turmoil of this is just absurd. I mean, it's unfathomable.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. It's crazy.
Yes.
Yeah. So they tried to separate us again, and they tried
physically, security comes
yes.
in.
Yeah. And I was like, no, you can't separate us. And security was involved. We were in the security office when this was happening. And then we wound up staying at the Travelodge for the night because they wouldn't let us go back into our room and get our stuff to leave. And then when we woke up in the morning from the Travelodge, which we had to get money from my parents to be able to even have money to stay there because we didn't have any money.
Contact with them and tell them what's going on.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And my dad did say at the time, he said, if they don't let you leave, I'll come there and get you. And then, so when we woke up in the morning from the Travelodge and we're like, how are we going to sort this out? There was a whole, basically they were already there. The chief of security of the LA base was there with a U-Haul full of all of our stuff that was in these meticulously packed boxes with an inventory of which box every single thing was in, down to Q-tips and condoms. It was
God.
It was so weird. And he was basically gave us the U-Haul and was said, Dallas, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure you never, ever speak to your family again. And then basically left after he told me that I was a piece of crap. And I was like, yeah, go fuck yourself.
God, these people are so deep.
Yeah. So then, and then we went down to San Diego to his parents' house. But then when we looked at basically it was paid for us to drive all the way to Virginia where my parents lived. And I didn't even realize that that's where they expected us to go once Dallas was leaving.
Oh, your parents are in Virginia now, not Mexico.
Right, yeah. Okay. Sorry, at some point in the middle they had moved to Mexico.
Quite a change.
Yeah, sorry. Minor detail. Anyways, so they had expected us to go to Virginia and not to San Diego. And so because Dallas's family were active Scientologists, and so us being in contact with them made it so they couldn't do Scientology, and they didn't want us to poison the field for them. And so so we drove down to San Diego that night, and his mom was really happy to see us, and his dad was kind of oh shit, we're in trouble. Yeah.
But if you guys went down there, his parents, the whole threat was that if he leaves, he's going to be disconnected from them. So had they been warned by Mike Rinder's office or something that you guys were leaving and might be coming and they're supposed to turn you away?
Well, they hadn't been warned because they apparently thought that we were going to Virginia where my parents were. So I think that Mike Rinder and them didn't realize that we would be going to San Diego.
But don't they have to think there's a possibility that you might say, fuck it, we're going to make a break for it? Like, they don't have control over you.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I think that they did think that, and I think that Dallas's dad immediately reported it in and was like, what am I supposed to do? And I think they reached out to him as well, because when we returned the U-Haul, they probably saw where it was because they had paid for it and they realized that we were there. And, I didn't know it at the time, but like recently these documents that Mike Rinder had from that time, that have kind of like recently been made known publicly, they kind of document all the things that they were doing, all the behind the scenes things that they were talking with Dallas about, that they were like having people like scout Dallas's parents' house, and they were like, their car is there, and like, but we'll wait till they leave before we go in and talk to Dallas's parents, and just all this stuff. But yeah, I mean, I guess something that should have been like really like climactic, like, oh, we finally left, it's a relief, we're not there anymore, kind of just, and while it kind of was like that, it was just straight to we were living with Dallas's parents at the time, just like being harassed every night.
Are they being like, but they're being punished for this, right? Because they're letting you stay there.
No, they're trying to convince us 24/7 to go back or to get the confessional that we would have to get in order to be in good standing with Scientology. And we're trying to tell them all the things that happen there, and they either don't believe us or don't care. And they're trying to tell us that, well, if Scientology technology was applied correctly, this would not be happening.
Oh, my God.
And it was just so annoying to be being told this by a public Scientologist when I'd been in the Sea Org my whole life. Like, I just like wanted to strangle him the whole time.
Yeah, because he's a pleb compared to you.
Exactly, yeah. And so it was just like so frustrating. And then once again, they were feeling like I was the bad person taking their angel son out of Scientology. And then, they were slowly convincing Dallas to pay the freeloader bill, which basically any course, any studying that you did or auditing you received while in the Sea Org, because you're breaking your billionaire contract, you then have to pay for it, like pay regular prices.
How much was your bill?
So they didn't give it to me right away. And I actually don't remember, because when I saw it, it didn't make any difference to me. I was like, I'm never going to pay that. Like, there was never 1 second where I even remotely considered that I would ever pay that. So maybe if I had considered it, then I would remember, but I just didn't care. So, but in order to remain a Scientologist in good standing who can speak to your family still and do courses, you have to pay it. And they were trying to convince us to pay it. And so so they owned a jewelry store. So we worked there. And then we lived with them. And basically it just amounted to me getting harassed all day and all night by them and they were being called by Scientology all the time, reporting on us, talking to Dallas separately, having him try to convince me to finish my confessionals and so on.
But he was telling them some of the horror stories too, right?
Yeah, he was telling them, yeah. And again, they either didn't believe it or they didn't care. That's what's hard for me to accept now. Like when you hear stories of your son being held in a basement and how badly he was treated, like I don't understand how you can still continue to give money to and defend the organization. But I mean, yeah.
Because they're brainwashed.
For sure. It's just like, so this is a level where it's like, but they lived in the regular world. They were getting paid tons of money. And I can empathize. It's just like when I think of me getting unbrainwashed when I was like born there, I'm like, come on, like,
excuse? Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, and I understand being brainwashed, but we're talking about your son. We're talking about your son here. It's not just something you saw that you didn't like. We're talking about how your child was getting treated. I think that I just have like a little bit of a bitchy attitude about that.
No,
like,
it's perfectly understandable.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so it was just like went on for months and years and
Years you're in there.
yeah. Well, so we moved out of their house like after like 6 months.
But stayed working for them.
I actually got a different job too. So
What'd you do?
I worked at a healthy dog food company. So when we moved to our apartment, we got 2 dogs, and it was kind of like having kids for me. It was like the first time I was able to have our own apartment.
Had you been around pets before?
At the ranch, we had like 8 dogs, and they followed us around everywhere, and it was kind of like, yeah. So I loved dogs, and yeah. So we had 2 little dogs, and just like when I was able to have my own job and get away, but Dallas still worked there, and so he slowly started reading things on the internet more and more, and there were people who we knew that had left, and their stories were kind of like fresh, and he sort of became more and more disillusioned. But before we moved, we actually, like, his dad wound up convincing us to go back to Scientology and get what's called the Committee of Evidence, which is sort of like a court-martial. They have like, it's like a little trial, I guess. Yeah. And so it's like a little trial that they do, and they accuse you of all the things that they think you did, and you plead guilty or not guilty. And just like, I was just like, I absolutely hated doing it. Like, I did not want to go there. I was not believing in Scientology at all. So it's like almost like it hurt me physically because I had to do it for Dallas's dad's sake. Yeah. For Dallas's sake. Yeah. And it was just like excruciating. And then, I don't know, there's all these stories, like when we were working there, like Dallas got this call in the middle of the day that was like, I'm just a good Samaritan, but I want you to know you're being followed. And your wife has been to the hairdresser, she's been here. And it just, Scientology was following us everywhere we were going. Someone with a police scanner called us who heard them talking to each other to tell us.
Are these hired private investigators who aren't Scientologists, but they're hired by Scientology, or are they private investigators who also happen to be Scientologists?
I think that they're hired by Scientology. Yeah. And I think at first maybe some, like, OSA was looking at Dallas's parents' house to see if we were there.
See, like, I know money's green and I know, capitalism exists and whatever, but these guys can take so many goddamn jobs, and they take it with an organization that, I mean, these dudes have brains. They're not in it, so they know what it is. Mm-hmm. They take it, I mean, I guess some of these guys do take it with evil people, but they're taking it from an organization that is objectively trying to torture people and ruin their lives. I just think there's a special place in hell for that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And it was just like months after months of this until finally we moved out and got some freedom. I think they tried to declare us suppressive people, and then they did give us a freeloader debt. I don't even remember what it was, but then...
You shredded it?
Yeah. I mean, I was like... But Dallas wanted to pay it, and then it was kind of like for a little bit, I was like living with somebody who I was like, he thinks... Like, I was like, if you take our money and you give it to them, like, that's not going to happen. Like, it was just like kind of being back when he was being tricked by them. Anyway, so thankfully he started reading stuff on the internet. He started reading stuff about L. Ron Hubbard when we watched the South Park thing.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Now, what's that like? Were there did you learn things in there that you didn't know?
Yeah, I didn't know any of that. I didn't know any of, I mean, I never heard about Xenu and all that crap when I was in there because I hadn't reached.
You hadn't gotten that. Wow.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, like, I was afraid to watch it because I was like, there's still this lingering thing, like, because they tell you if you learn it before you're ready to, you can, like, die or, like, get cancer or turn crazy or something.
Oh, my God.
And I was like, and then I think so. I tested it on Dallas.
Yeah. He threw him to the
watched
lambs,
it first.
to the wolves.
He deserved it at this point, though.
Oh, my God.
He watched it first, and he was like, oh, my God, you have to watch this. So we watched it, and we were like, oh, my God, like, that's so dumb.
Yeah.
But in the end, like, it was kind of a big deal, but also, like, not that big of a deal because I could see myself believing that at the time, and we believed all sorts of other stuff. So
Prison Planet, all that.
yeah, it was just like, oh God. And I remember going through a period of time when I was like, okay, I no longer believe this. Now I need to start thinking about all of the things that I'm taking for granted and see what I really think about them.
Yes.
Do I think that I'm a Thetan? And I would just like have to sit with it for a few days and like just like think about it. And this time Dallas was like unbrainwashed, and he was like, okay, no, this is all ridiculous. And L. Ron Hubbard was a con man, and he sort of came around. But his parents were still causing trouble, still trying to separate us. Scientology was putting all this pressure on them. And yeah.
But so you've I want to make sure I'm still understanding this right. I'm going to miss this. You left the Sea Org, but you guys are still technically Scientologists. Or he is. Dallas is, I'm sorry.
Well, so what Scientology was putting pressure on Dallas's parents for was to disconnect from us at this point.
Yeah.
Because we were declared suppressive people.
Both of you are.
Yes. Even though they didn't send an issue out because it would be bad PR, we were essentially declared.
Okay.
And they were trying to get them to disconnect from us. And Dallas's parents still felt like they could handle us to be in Scientology. And so they still constantly tried. And then there became a point when, I think it was when it was like there was a biography about Tom Cruise written by Andrew Morton. Yeah.
Yeah, it was unauthorized. Yep.
Right, yeah. And it came out, and in it talked about the RPF, all these things about Scientology separating people from families. And basically from that, Scientology released a statement that said that Scientology loves families, all of this is nonsense, the RPF doesn't exist, and like disconnection doesn't exist. And at the time, I was going through this with Dallas's family, and I was just so pissed off at how arrogantly and blatantly they were lying to everybody, meanwhile doing this every day.
That's right.
Trying to make my life even harder than it already was when they could have just left us alone. And so I like wound up like writing this letter to the girl who had written the letter, and like I put it on an anti-Scientology blog, and then it wound up like getting picked up by some media. And I was basically just saying that no, Scientology does disconnect people from their families. Everything they're writing here is bullshit. And yeah, I just kind of like called them out.
And that's a big deal coming from you too, because of who you are. Right.
Yeah. At the time, yes, definitely.
Now, what kind of blowback did you get from them for that?
They mostly tried to. So at that point, they didn't talk to me directly. They just had us followed. And then there was someone in our lives who, you know, we thought was our friend. And it wound up that he was like sort of implanted in our lives by them. It was somebody who we knew in the Sea Org, and he had left. And we let him stay with us because he was having a hard time. But it turned out that he was reporting everything back to them. And
oh my God.
But mostly they were putting pressure on Dallas's parents to disconnect from us, which they had all but succeeded in, like just barely. And then we started going on a few TV shows and like doing interviews, and it was great. But it was also, they kind of wound up turning everything into being about Tom Cruise. Like I would talk to them for like hours, and they'd be like ask me some question about Tom Cruise, and then they'd like soundbite that. And it was also really frustrating, but whatever, like some of the word was getting out there, and it was better than nothing. And then I wound up being on, like I was like recording with Nightline, and Dallas's family somehow found out about this. And then so they were like meeting with Scientology, and they wanted us to not have the Nightline thing going on. They didn't want us to be on Nightline, and they wound up like flying and talking to Dallas's parents, and then flying from wherever they were to San Diego in a helicopter with this two women who were like very senior officials in Scientology and wanted to meet up with us and convince us not to do it. So we like met with them in a Denny's. At first I said, no, I'm not going to meet with them. Yeah.
They couldn't do a better place than Denny's. Oh my God.
I know. The waiter there was like, what the fuck
is going on?
Yes, exactly. And they were like trying to like show me all these Scientology policies, like about you're acting this way because you've done bad things. And I was like, guys, I don't give a like those policies, like throw them in the trash. They mean nothing to me. Yeah, nothing. And then Dallas's parents were there. Were like, well, they mean something, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm fucking surrounded by crazy people all the time. And so like, I kind of said to them, and they were people who I knew. So I was like, when was the last time you had a day off? And they were like, we don't need time off. We love working very, very hard. And I was like, guys,
I'll
like,
bet
come
you
on.
do.
Yeah. And so they were like, well, what do we need to do to make it so this doesn't happen? And I was like, well, you need to undeclare my Aunt Sarah, like make her not declare a suppressive person. And I was like, and you need to let Sea Org members have time off. And I like made all these ridiculous rules, which they were never going to follow. And they're like, we'll think about it. All right. But don't tell anyone about this meeting.
Good thinking. I'll be at Dateline.
Exactly. Yeah. So when we drove away, the next day we were being followed again. And I was just like, fuck you guys. Like, no. I just like continued with it. I never spoke with them again. So it was like the Nightline thing came out. And then after that came out, like soon after, it was when Anonymous started speaking out about Scientology. There had been some clip of Tom Cruise on the internet, and Scientology tried to get it taken down because it was embarrassing and he was acting psycho. And Anonymous like kind of was like saying that they were going to take down Scientology because of them censoring the internet. And then, I guess, so that was kind of happening at the same time as me speaking out. And there were protests happening like sort of around the world from Anonymous. And then me and two other girls created this site called ex-Scientologykids.com. And it sort of became a forum where people could speak openly about their experiences in Scientology growing up. And yeah, so then at that point I was kind of like an outspoken critic.
At this point, though, are you also, because you're out doing a job, you're out in the real world, you're starting to get used to things. So I'm sure there's some stuff that's a shock. I mean, you and I could be here for like the next week to talk about everything you went
I know.
through. We obviously don't have time today to go through all that. But like, you're making friends in the real world who have nothing to do with Scientology, right?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And so coming out though, like I didn't know how to drive. I didn't have a bank account.
Oh, that's right.
I was still like just trying to act like a normal person. Like I wasn't used to going to the grocery store. I had to learn how to cook. But like, so the few people that I worked with who I would tell a little bit of my story to, like, they were like, what did you say? They were like, that's not normal. And I was like,
no shit, Sherlock.
yes. But they were all so like nice.
Of course.
And so supportive. And that was something that you didn't experience in Scientology. If you ever said anything bad about anything in Scientology, specifically Scientology, it was like they taught you that you were saying it because you had done something bad. You only said bad things if you had done something bad, and you were trying to make less of the thing you did something bad to by saying how bad it is. I don't even know if that made sense, but you're trying to justify the bad thing you did by belittling the target of the bad thing you did. And so it was like nice to be able to speak openly and to be believed for literally once in my life about something I had experienced. Everything I always said, or anytime I like, it's not like I had parents who I could tell if something bad happened, or anyone who I could really go to. Nobody cared. And so it was like the first time that I was like listened to and met with like empathy and kindness. And that was just like a huge deal to me. Like it just felt like,
absolutely.
Yeah, like being validated. And yeah. And so, and I think that kind of sort of made me calm down from the like hyper over explaining and anxiety of not being believed and trying to fight everything. Yeah,
because you're learning a whole new world too, and you don't know how people are going to react.
Right.
Had your grandparents left by this point too?
No, my grandpa didn't leave until many years later. Like even
2012, maybe?
Yes, about then. And by that time I was like already writing my book.
Yeah, your book came out in 2013, right?
Yes.
So he was out when the book came out.
Yes, but he was still very pro-Scientology at the time. And he wasn't talking to me at that time because I was bad. I was a suppressive person.
So he was just out of the Sea Org, but still a Scientologist.
Well, because of who he wasn't welcome in Scientology, but he still mentally believed in Scientology. And that process was harder for him as somebody who, like, you know, would have gotten his whole family into Scientology.
Yeah, his whole life. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a lot harder to, like, back out from when you're that old and you've spent that many years in it and you've gotten that many people into it.
Well, in the meantime, before he gets out, in these years between like 05 and 2012, you obviously had reconnected with your parents right when you were getting out, but did you get a chance to rebuild your relationship with your parents, maybe your brother, even your aunt?
Yes, there was definitely some time for that, and some of it went great and some of it didn't. Like, I guess I think that, like, when you set a goal for yourself that you're gonna, like, rebuild everything and everything's gonna be fine, like, you kind of can't ever relive your childhood. Like, you actually can't get it back. Like, honestly, there's nothing you can do. You can just maybe build something new that is valuable. And so I think that we did that, but we've definitely had our ups and downs and craziness continue. It never ends, but it's definitely better than it was.
Did you have, I mean, we talked about this last night with Aaron, but, you know, did you have the emotions come up, like resenting them for being born into this and them bringing you into it?
So at first, I did not have anything like that. They helped me get out, and I was extremely grateful, and I understood why they were there and all that. I think that I started to feel a little bit differently about it when I had my own kids.
When was that?
So my son was born in 2009, and my initial reaction wasn't resentment or anything like that, because my parents were very helpful with my kids and they were involved. But it just, like, kind of, I guess it became, and you know what, there isn't any resentment until I guess it's hard for me to talk about my story without, on some level, my mom feeling like I'm insulting her. And it's like, kind of like, I feel like I go out of my way to not make it personal and to be as kind about it and understanding about it as I can. But it's like, I guess it's her choice if she's going to make it all about her rather than me telling my story. And so that's something that we have struggled with. She's both been supportive and both been, like, thinking that I'm only trying to drag her, which I'm not trying to do. Like, I want her to be happy. I want her to have a good life. And it's so it's almost the things that happen in the now that make it hard to forgive. The rest I can forgive. I don't care. But it's the same person that did those things.
Yeah.
And so there are still going to be some of those tendencies. Many of them go away, but it's still the same person. Yeah.
I mean, I think we were saying something similar talking about Aaron's situation last night, but, you know, it's like the conscious in her is beating down the subconscious of knowing that, like, your life doesn't have to turn out the way it did for a long time, if not for her. But then there's, like, you know, the motherly instinct, there's, like, denial with that. And
Right.
You know, that's a human thing. I can't imagine being in that position, but.
Right, exactly. And I haven't been in that position, and I think that, like, I don't know, maybe if I was, I would feel differently. So in the end, I just want my mom to be happy.
Yeah,
and
that's great.
Yeah, so yeah.
How's your relationship with your dad?
It's good. Like, I mean, me and my dad were closer growing up. Yeah. So, but it's not, like, you know, exactly the same as, like, I don't know, maybe your relationship is with your dad, not to assume anything. Sure. But, like, yeah, so it's, like, decent. Yeah.
And then with your kids, it's got to be a really cool full circle life to see that your kids get to grow up normal and they don't have to deal with all this.
Yeah, like, and it's, like, actually healing. Like,
yes.
So, like, in some way, like, being able to give the things that I didn't have is almost the same as me getting them.
Yes.
Like, it's like.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. Except I think I did take it too far and feel like if I mess up or if I do anything wrong, then I like would have all this anxiety that I'm repeating the cycle. And I've had to, like, come to a middle ground where it's like, okay, you're doing the best you can. And and I just have to like learn not to like make myself the Sea Org member of parents. Yes. Like I need to remember myself and that I'm important too, and not throw everything I have into being a parent to the point where I don't sleep, I don't eat, I don't have a life, because I had so much anxiety about repeating the cycle. And then I realized that I'm the one who got like kind of fucked over from the beginning, so I need to take care of myself. And I guess like, so now I'm just kind of finding that balance of doing both. But like,
that's great though. I mean, it's a, like we were saying earlier, it's a lifelong journey in a way, because you're undoing 21 years of, I mean, that's your whole development.
Right.
Know? It's so impressive. Like, you know, because conversing with you guys over the last couple of days, looks like you're doing great. Got to be honest with you. You seem normal. I would never know that you guys were in something like this for so many years if I just met you off the street, which I can imagine it took a while to get there. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. That is good to know. Because I remember when I first left, I was like, I talked to that person. I was like, I think they thought I was normal. I think I tricked them.
These conversations are very valuable for people to hear, because it reminds me like how lucky I am to have grown up in a normal type situation. And it also, I think, as I was saying in our conversation last night, I think it's a good reminder that all of us are susceptible to falling under the thumb of something like this. It's not like you have a choice when you're born into it, but you know, right. Your parents fell into it. So many other people do, and you should shine a light on it. You should talk about where there's evil in the world. I mean, I think there's no doubt about it. It's, you know, we can laugh at some of the things Scientology does because like some of it's objectively funny, but to live it is not. You know, I really feel like it's the root of evil.
Right, yeah. And I think that if it was just like some silly beliefs about aliens or whatever, it's like no big deal. Who cares? People can believe what they want. But I think that the reason why we talk about it is because it's not just that. It's about human trafficking and kids getting treated in a certain way and ruining families. So they can believe what they want. Like, I don't have a problem with that. Just like they can't do things that are illegal and hurt people all the time and get away with it.
Well, I hope to see it. Hope to see more conversations like this happen publicly. Obviously, love what you're doing with the channel and everything. So, you know, maybe one day something like that won't exist. That would be really cool. I think that'd be a win. And, you know, the two of you also helping people leave Scientology and being able to relate to that is really paying it forward as well, which I think is really, really cool, as I mentioned last night. So this was incredible. Again, we'd be sitting here talking about the psychology of this for a very long time, but you have a flight to catch. So I do have to get you out of here. Otherwise, I'd keep going. But your book is going to be down, link in description for people to check that out. And also, I would actually recommend that 60 minutes short that you did was really, really good. So maybe we should put that link down there as well. I like that a lot. But thank you so much for sharing everything. You did an amazing job explaining it.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me and listening.
Of course. Hey, Ron, thanks for putting it together, my brother. All right, everybody else, you know what it is. Give it a thought. Get back to me. Peace. Thank you guys for watching the episode. Before you leave, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and smash that like button on the video. It's a huge help. And also, if you're over on Instagram, be sure to follow the show at Julian Dorey Podcast, or also on my personal page at Julian D. Dorey. Both links are in the description below. Finally, if you'd like to catch up on our latest episodes, use the Julian Dorey Podcast playlist link in the description below. Thank you.